Chapter 1149. From this moment on, the two true monarchs decided to bring Chinyu with them to divide up the final benefits of this great battle in the nightmare ancestral land. That's right, these were powerful and fierce abyssal true monarchs who were also incomparably proud. Even if Chinyu could release an aura that left them feeling dread, if it didn't have enough strength, then it would be impossible for him to gain an advantage in front of these two true monarchs. This was because this was the abyss where strength determined everything. If one didn't have enough strength to support their plans, then it would be a joke. But in truth, Elder Profound Mind and Monarch Profound Strategy would never have imagined that from the very start, the two of them had only played the role of hired thugs. As for how to divide the benefits, let alone eating meat with Chinyu, he didn't even plan on leaving behind any hot soup. This was because there was no way to divide the most important benefits. As for the rest, he didn't care about them at all. But besides these benefits, there was nothing else in the entire nightmare ancestral land that was worth the true monarchs risking their lives for. This was a sad story that made people feel a little sad. Of course, sadness was sadness, but more than that, there was definitely anger. Unless the two true monarchs decided to perish together with the old turtle, how could they be willing to see such a situation occur? The abyssal titan narrowed his eyes, a bit of helplessness in them. This was because he was well aware that the chances of them perishing together were nearly negligible. The old turtle had his strongest trump card broken. Although he could still hold on, he would still be pressed to the ground by the two true monarchs in the end. Taking a step back, even if the old turtle really was hiding some desperate trump card that could drag the two true monarchs to perish together at a critical moment, Chinyu still had to prevent this situation from occurring. In short, they had to fall out with each other. Then, what was placed in front of Chinyu was an incomparably sharp problem. He had to think of a way to suppress the raging anger of Elder Profound Mind and Monarch Profound Strategy. The little blue lamp's plan was extremely meticulous, so it certainly wouldn't overlook this point. But no matter how Chinyu looked at it, this was far too risky. If he wasn't careful, his fate would be bleak. He couldn't help but ask this in his heart. The little blue lamp remained silent. Chinyu's heart chilled, because this kind of calmness could be seen as disdain when one was full of confidence, or it could be understood as a lack of confidence. Although the little blue lamp had released an extremely tyrannical strength this time, directly suppressing two true kings wasn't easy at all. If it really did possess such great strength, there would have been no need for it to carefully conceal itself ever since it entered the abyss, or even for a long period of time before that. The more he thought about it, the more uncertain he became. He wanted to ask a few more questions, but in the end his lips twitched and he maintained his silence. Now that things had come to this, did he still have a way out? Since there was no way to retreat, the result would be the same whether he asked or not. He could only hope that the little blue lamp wouldn't drop the ball at this critical moment. Otherwise, if the little blue lamp's movements were as fierce as a tiger's, and the two true kings could only grit their teeth and go all out, then all their efforts would be in vain, and they might even be chased to the ends of the world. That would be far too ridiculous. Rumble. Terrifying energy fluctuations surged and spread at an astonishing speed, engulfing the entire ancestral land. Everything was torn apart and destroyed, but the shattered space and earth were restored in the blink of an eye. It was like a mirror that was shattered and restored, repeating itself over and over again. As mentioned before, as the home that the old turtle had created for himself, the strongest defensive turtle shell, it was impossible for the ancestral land's small world to only have this sort of passive ability. Ah! The old turtle screeched. His face was fierce and cruel, but there was also an unconcealable fear in his voice. The two true kings were going all out, and he could clearly feel the shadow of death descending upon him. This sort of feeling was terrible to the extreme. He had already lived for so many years, enduring endless loneliness, spending all of his heart and soul to struggle until today. How could he die here? He couldn't die. He definitely couldn't die here. His eyes fell on Chinyu. The old turtle was well aware of the key point of today's situation. If it weren't for Qin Yu destroying his strongest card, how could Elder Alpha and King Xuanzi have bullied him so miserably? They would have hammered him until there was no road to heaven or door to hell, and he would have only been able to miserably wait for death to arrive. If he wanted to live, he had to make changes. And without a doubt, killing Qin Yu was the only and most correct choice. So from the very start, the old turtle had been accumulating his strength and waiting for a chance. He could only attack once. He absolutely could not fail, otherwise he feared he really would die. As this thought appeared in the old turtle's mind, a deep fear flashed in his eyes. Then, endless madness and ruthlessness collided and wove together, forming a powerful stubbornness. Live, he only wanted to live. The abyssal titan incarnation of Qin Yu's heart suddenly shrank. A cold vigilance rose in his heart. He looked at the old turtle and just happened to meet the stubborn and dangerous eyes of the old turtle. His eyebrows immediately furrowed together. In the next moment, there was a heaven-shaking explosion. It was mixed with the angry roars of Alpha, the old demon dragon, and King Xuanzi. It was clear that the two true kings had been caught off guard by the sudden eruption of the old turtle's attack and suffered loss. Then, that terrifying strength that was enough to severely wound an ordinary true king erupted like a river bursting through a dam. Without the least bit of delay, after careful calculations and preparations, this attack of strength hurtled straight towards Qin Yu. Kacha! Kacha! The mirror that had been shattered countless times exploded once more. Space, the earth, and everything within it were instantly destroyed wherever the shockwave passed. Without time to dodge, the abyssal titan incarnation of Qin Yu was instantly sucked in. He had experienced this situation many times already. This was because the entire ancestral land had become a battlefield between the two true kings and the old turtle. There was nowhere to hide. But this time was different. This was because everything that shattered didn't recover like before. This wasn't the right way to describe it, because it recovered. But as it recovered, it collapsed into countless pieces. Then, it repeated itself again and again. Shatter, condense, shatter, condense, shatter, condense. It was like a disc that was stuck, constantly repeating itself. But of course, it was impossible for it to just be a stuck repetition. This was because Qin Yu was still in this space. Every time he shattered and condensed, he needed to consume a tremendous amount of strength to counteract the invading destructive strength. Right now, Qin Yu was safe because he still had enough strength to resist the tearing of space. But what would happen once his strength was exhausted? The only result would be that he would be torn apart by the repeated shattering and condensing of space. Then, he would turn into even smaller fragments, even smaller fragments, even smaller fragments, all the way until he was nothing more than nothing, until he completely vanished from sight. This was one of the killing moves of the strongest turtle shell, a trump card that the old turtle had prepared to deal with abnormal situations. The ancestral land could maintain its unchanging state, but it could also transform this unchanging state into a terrifying killing move. One shouldn't think that the current shattering of space was the same as before. That's right, although both sides looked exactly the same on the surface, the truth was that they were in two completely different states. The current shattering was because the old turtle had used the might of the abyss to constantly support the ancestral land over the countless years, allowing it to obtain a terrifying strength. Every time it shattered and repeated, the resulting destructive strength required an astonishing amount of consumption in order to be able to completely resist it. This sort of consumption didn't just refer to the strength within one's body, but also the might of a will on the same level as the abyss will. The old turtle was gambling. He was gambling that the strength within Qin Yu's body wouldn't be able to last for too long, and he was gambling that it was impossible for Qin Yu to control too much of that unknown and terrifying will. Regardless of which aspect it was, if he was exhausted in either one, all that awaited him would be instant annihilation. Of course, if they wanted to kill Qin Yu, this wasn't enough. This was because the two true kings in front of them wouldn't stare blankly on as he was killed. Although in their hearts, these two true kings wished they could tear Qin Yu apart and fry him in oil. In this situation, they were all in the same boat. If they wanted to live, they had to join forces. Thus, if they wanted to kill Qin Yu, they had to trap these two true kings so that they couldn't help him. Bang! Deep rumbling sounds erupted one after another. They were so dense and intense that even the sound of space shattering was drowned out. The shattered space began to crazily collapse and compress inwards. This was the source of the deep rumbling sounds just now. It was like a prison formed from the space itself. Space wasn't strong and couldn't resist the might of a true king. A casual strike could tear it apart. But what if two spaces overlapped? If two sides weren't enough, then there could be 3 layers. If 3 layers weren't enough, then there could be 4 layers, 40 layers, 400 layers, or even more. These were countless layers of space that were forcefully compressed together by a terrifying strength. The formidable, imprisoning strength it produced could produce an effect similar to a prison. Of course, unless space was compressed and superimposed endlessly, it would be destroyed by the true kings sooner or later. But what the old turtle wanted wasn't to use this to imprison these two true kings. As long as they couldn't split themselves to help Qin Yu, it was fine. Once Qin Yu was killed, he could restore the might of the abyss will. At that time, these two true kings would be fish on the chopping block. It wouldn't be a problem for him to eat them however he wanted. Of course, saying this was a bit arrogant. In the end, a true king was still a true king. They weren't easy to deal with. But eating them in the end wasn't a problem at all. Thus, Qin Yu's life or death was the key. He had to die, and he had to die a cold death. The old turtle hated his own main body the most, because he actually hoped that he would dissipate on his own initiative and in his life. This was simply unforgivable. But now, for the first time, the old turtle sincerely prayed that his main body could hear his voice and make his wish come true. Qin Yu, hurry and die. Qin Yu, hurry and die. Strictly speaking, this was the old turtle praying to himself. It seemed like a funny matter, but when the target was the abyss itself, it was impossible to laugh at. The abyss titan frowned, a dignified look in his eyes. At this moment, he could clearly feel the destructive might released by the shattering space, clearly rising. This was a very serious problem, because no one's strength was truly infinite. No matter how astonishing one's strength was, in a situation where it couldn't be replenished, there would eventually come a time when it would run out of energy. Qin Yu didn't know how much longer he could last, because the strength resisting the shattering of space came from the little blue lamp. By relying on his own strength alone, even if he summoned the true body of the Abyss Titan, he could only be considered a freakishly strong demon commander. But in the end, a demon commander was a demon commander. Even a freakishly strong demon commander was still a demon commander. In his current state, any random spatial crack could tear him to pieces. Qin Yu didn't know how long the little blue lamp could last. Although he trusted in his closest partner, this unknown restlessness still left his complexion ugly. In fact, your strength has already risen extremely quickly. Looking at the abyss and vast yang, you could be considered a peak existence amongst the trillions of lives. But this is still not fast enough. You need to become stronger, because after I take action today, it is likely that I will trigger a series of uncontrollable changes. You can think of it as the pull of an invisible aura that will cause you to encounter even more troubles. Of course, you can also think of these troubles as opportunities to rapidly increase your own strength as long as you can survive. The little blue lamp's thoughts fluctuated in Qin Yu's mind. There weren't many emotional fluctuations in its voice. But even so, Qin Yu could feel a trace of weariness in its voice. Qin Yu remembered the little blue lamp's words and didn't say anything else. He directly asked, "Do you have any problems?" If the little blue lamp couldn't continue, then he would die in the blink of an eye. Saying anything more would just be nonsense. So this was the key point. The little blue lamp was silent for a moment. Then it said, "No problem." As if to reassure Qin Yu, it paused for a moment and then said, "My weariness is mostly because I have sealed away the aura here so that no one can sense it. It is only a shadow. it cannot pose a threat to me. Sealed away the aura so that no one could sense it? Who could sense it? Of course, it was the will of the abyss. Qin Yu's heart chilled. This was just a shadow that had been hiding for countless years and feared death to the extreme, yet it possessed such terrifying might. If so, then just how tyrannical was the true will of the abyss? In that moment, Qin Yu's heart surged with excitement. But just as these thoughts appeared, they were interrupted by the little blue lamp. Don't think too much about it, otherwise it is possible that you will be sensed. Although the probability is almost negligible, it is best if we don't take any risks. There was a faint warning in its voice. Qin Yu's complexion changed. He quickly gathered his thoughts, but he still couldn't help but think about it. Just thinking about it meant that he could be discovered? Just what sort of terrifying existence was that? The little blue lamp lightly said, "The disparity between you and it is probably as great as the distance from here to vast Yang. Cultivate in peace. If everything goes smoothly this time, perhaps you will have a chance to touch upon its level." After he finished speaking, he silently added that the chances were even smaller than finding a lost grain of sand at the bottom of the sea. It was around 100,000 times smaller. Chapter 1150. The old turtle was waiting. He was waiting for Qin Yu to fail and be torn to pieces by the shattered space. But as he waited, his complexion changed. This was because he had waited for far too long, so long that the space cage he formed was nearly blown apart by arcane spell and profound strategies. But Qin Yu was still alive and well. Compared to when he first started, there was no change at all. That's right, there was no change at all. On the towering body of the abyssal titan, there wasn't even a scar to be seen. How was this possible? As a demon commander, no matter how freakish he was, there should be a limit. He should have died long ago. If Qin Yu didn't die, then the one to die in the end would be him. And the old turtle feared death the most. So, when he came to this realization, he couldn't help but feel panic in his heart. This would clearly have a bad effect on him and accelerate his death. This was because in a battle between true monarchs, any mistake would be magnified without limit. Elder Arcane Spell and Monarch Profound Strategies roared out loud. Their true monarch bodies erupted with their greatest strength. The old turtle that was barely holding on naturally couldn't resist. With a pitiful cry, he was sent flying away. Countless cracks appeared on the surface of his body. Kacha! Kacha! As the surface of the old turtle crumbled, a huge crack appeared in the towering temple on the ground. This was because, strictly speaking, they were one body to begin with. Their auras were connected, and they shared weal and woe. Elder Arcane Spell and Monarch Profound Strategies' eyes brightened. The shadow of betrayal couldn't hold on for much longer. As long as they killed it, everything would come to an end. Of course, while they killed the shadow of betrayal, they also had to think of a way to protect their own interests. Qin Yu was far more astonishing than they had imagined. Within the space cage, the two true monarchs were well aware just what sort of formidable strength Qin Yu was still alive. There was definitely a great secret hidden within his body. As for what this secret was, the two true monarchs didn't want to know. Or, it was more accurate to say that in order to live comfortably, even if the secret was placed in front of them, they still wouldn't look at it. In this world, the more one knew, the more dangerous it was. In their long lives, they had already understood this truth. Their eyes met. With a single glance, the two true monarchs had already reached an agreement. If everything went smoothly, there was no need to mention it. The three of them would divide the benefits. But if by any chance, then they had to work together. They couldn't just be laborers for nothing. Of course, there were risks, but the rewards in front of them were enough for Elder Alpha and King of Profound Strategies to make the decision to confront them head-on if things went wrong. The space around Qin Yu continued to shatter, condense, shatter, and condense again. Just as the little blue lamp said, his safety was guaranteed and he hadn't suffered any injuries at all. Old Tortoise, on the other hand, couldn't hold on any longer. The abyssal titan narrowed its eyes and revealed a grave expression. Now, it was time to wrap up the entire plan. This was the highest point, and it also meant the most intense danger. If he was not careful, everything he had done before would be meaningless. But in reality, everyone had underestimated the old tortoise's ability to survive. Or to be more precise, his tenacious will to live was so tenacious that it caused tears to well up in one's eyes. Many times, Mysterious Mind and Mysterious Mind King had thought that the shadow of betrayal would completely collapse and disappear, but he still lived on strongly. It was just that its body had shrunk a lot and became extremely dim. This was a sign that its power was about to be exhausted. But he was still alive, even though he had been hammered miserably. "Die for me," King Mysterious Mind angrily roared. In this battle, his true king body had been severely damaged. If he continued to maintain it, he would need to spend a massive amount of time to recover. In fact, once the consumption exceeded a certain limit, the difficulty of recovering would skyrocket. This was clearly a situation he didn't want to see. Bang! With a loud explosion, the old tortoise was sent flying away. Massive cracks appeared all over his body, but not a single drop of blood flowed out. This was because the shadow was an illusion to begin with, so it was impossible for it to have flesh and blood. But he was still alive. Even though his entire face was twisted and contorted in pain, his eyes were still filled with an intense desire to live. The reason he had a desire to live was because he feared death. But more importantly, the old tortoise still had a final card in his hand. However, the old tortoise was still hesitating. Who should he use this card on? Because this was truly his final card. If it was effective, then he could continue living. Otherwise, he would truly die. Qin Yu's cultivation was the weakest, but he was also the most terrifying. Elder Mysterious Mind was an abyssal demon dragon, and because of his bloodline, he was doted on by the will of the abyss. Thus, he wasn't a good choice. Then, the only one left was King Xuanzi. The Netherworld King bloodline was strong enough. And what was even better was that this race had suffered the disdain of the abyss because of the grave mistakes they had committed. There was no time left. The old tortoise's incomparably illusory figure was covered with cracks. A sharp light flashed in his eyes, and his body shivered. Success, he had to succeed. Bang! His body suddenly exploded, turning into countless fragments. King Xuanzi was startled for a moment. He discovered that his fist had finally killed off the shadow of betrayal. He subconsciously smiled, but just as this smile spread across his face, it froze in place before it could spread across his face. His eyes revealed shock and anger. King Xuanzi roared out loud, and his true king body punched out. But the wild strength that erupted wasn't able to affect the black shadow that flew towards him. It howled forwards, and in the blink of an eye it fused into his body. King Xuanzi froze where he was. He looked down at the true king body and the massive shadow it cast on the ground. Although the ripples it caused were small, it didn't escape his eyes. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. His heart wildly beat in his chest, and the power of his bloodline erupted, sweeping through every inch of his flesh and blood. He hadn't obtained anything. King Xuanzi shivered. A cold chill gushed out from the depths of his heart and gradually spread throughout his body. He opened his eyes and met the mysterious dragon's gaze. This old demon dragon, was he sympathizing with him? Yes, he was sympathizing, but even more so was fear. Damn it! This gaze caused King Xuanzi's complexion to become even uglier. The terrifying shockwaves of strength and space were rapidly dissipating. But the ancestral land seemed to have lost its source of strength. Or it could be said that the eternal and unchanging attribute that supported it was now disappearing. The most direct manifestation of this was that the speed at which space and Earth were being torn apart was slowing down. And at this time, Qin Yu also obtained his freedom. After a brief silence, the little blue lamp sighed. It said in his heart, "It's just how afraid of death does it have to be to cultivate an immortal body as a shadow." In truth, the little blue lamp was only half sighing. The rest of its thoughts fell on Qin Yu. The shadow of betrayal had cultivated an immortal body. This was something that even he never imagined would happen. Thus, this was an unexpected situation that exceeded his plans. It wasn't that the little blue lamp's thoughts weren't meticulous enough, but that something like an immortal body, of course, it wasn't something that could be healed after being injured. It wasn't an ability that was nearly undying and indestructible. That was a heaven-defying attribute. As long as one used it, they would be able to live. In short, it was terrifyingly difficult to cultivate, and it basically wouldn't appear in this world. But it had appeared, although it was an accident. Looking at the current situation, this accident wouldn't pose a threat. Rather, it would replace the most dangerous part of the little blue lamp's plan. Well, at this time, he could tell the truth. There was no perfect plan in this world. The more one wanted to obtain, the more one had to pay a corresponding price. So, Qin Yu's guess wasn't wrong. He originally wanted to take risks, but since he used the word originally to describe it, that meant he no longer needed to take risks. This was the second half of the little blue lamp's sigh. This brat Qin Yu's luck was truly invincible. Normally it was fine, but in a critical moment, it was always so amazing. If it were only like this, the little blue lamp wouldn't have such a deep sigh. And the most important point was that the shadow of the abyss had cultivated an immortal body. And in the end, this shadow would become Qin Yu's. The previous description of 100,000 times smaller didn't seem to be appropriate anymore. If everything went smoothly, then it would be 10,000 times. No, it might be several thousand times or even lower. Don't underestimate this reduction. It had to be known that the little blue lamp's goal was the will of the abyss itself. Sighing was sighing, but the little blue lamp reacted quickly. Thus, Qin Yu immediately received the revised follow-up plan. He stepped forwards and said in a low voice, "King Xuanzi, you're going to be in big trouble." King Xuanzi, who had nowhere to vent his anger, directly exploded. "I know. I don't need you to remind me." He was truly enraged. The shadow of betrayal was about to be eliminated. Although there was still the threat of Qin Yu. If he joined forces with this old demon dragon, there was a high chance they would be able to obtain a considerable amount of benefits. But who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, the shadow of betrayal would self-destruct? Then, a fragment would fly out and become a part of his shadow. One didn't need to be a genius to know that this shadow fragment that had fused into him and couldn't sense any threat at all wasn't as simple as it seemed. What nonsense! That was the shadow of the abyss. And what left King Xuanzi most angry was why he had been chosen. That old demon dragon was stronger and larger than the shadow of betrayal. So wasn't he a better choice? And there was also Qin Yu. His cultivation was weak, and he was also trapped where he was. So why did the shadow of betrayal have to choose him? Did the shadow of betrayal think he was easy to bully? Or did the shadow of betrayal think that he, as a true king, was weak? The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. King Xuanzi's complexion paled, and his eyes darkened so much it seemed as if they would drip water at any moment. The shadow of betrayal rejoiced in his heart, but his complexion wasn't too good either. He had consumed the strength of a true king's body, and now it was over like this? He hadn't obtained any benefits at all. This wasn't the style of an abyssal demon dragon. Taking a deep breath, the shadow of betrayal said, "King Xuanzi, what happened?" King Xuanzi's face turned green. "What happened? If you ask me, who am I supposed to ask?" Chapter 1151. He took a deep breath. "I must immediately return to the royal bloodline. Farewell." He lifted a hand, about to tear open space. The old turtle's aura vanished, and there was no way for the ancestral land to continue sealing away a true king. Qin Yu lightly said, "King Profound Strategies, I fear you don't truly understand my meaning." He looked into King Profound Strategies' gloomy eyes. "The fragment of the shadow of betrayal has already taken root in your shadow. After a period of nurturing, it will complete its rebirth. At that time, it will slowly swallow up your shadow. Believe me, there is no way for you to stop it. The final result is that you will completely lose your own will and become a puppet that is possessed." King Profound Strategies coldly said, "How can you be sure?" Qin Yu said, The reason I can be sure is because I know that the shadow of betrayal splits into is called the time immortal body. He paused for a moment, his voice becoming increasingly low. The general meaning of this name is that even the fleeting flow of time cannot destroy it. You should understand that time is undoubtedly the most formidable and irresistible force in this world. Time immortal body. Monarch Xuanji's pupils shrank. Although this was the first time he had heard this name, the moment he heard it clearly, he felt a cold fear rise from the bottom of his heart. Like a stone falling into the water, it caused ripples that gradually spread throughout his body. He felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. His intuition told him that what Qin said was true. He looked down at the shadow beneath him, as if he were staring at a bottomless black hole. It was like a gaping maw, diabolically grinning as it waited for him to fall into the abyss. Cold sweat instantly covered his forehead, and his complexion paled. This was because it wasn't just the old turtle that feared death. In fact, all living beings in the world instinctively fear death. Correspondingly, the stronger one was, the longer they lived, and the more intense their fear of death would be. The cold cruelty in his eyes slowly faded away, replaced by fear and restlessness. King Profound Strategies stared at Qin. "What else do you know?" Qin said, "I know how to save you." King Profound Strategies fell silent. He didn't doubt Qin. If he could say the name of the time immortal body, then it wasn't impossible for him to save him. He took a deep breath and said, "What do you want?" Qin smiled. "I lack a powerful servant." "Impossible!" King Xuanji roared. His eyes widened as he glared at Qin, anger burning within him. In any other situation, if Qin dared to say such words, he would immediately be torn to pieces. This was the greatest humiliation to a true king. But the situation was stronger than him. No matter how angry he was, he had to endure it for the possibility of survival. Qin, you should be well aware that in order to reach the true king realm, you must obtain the approval of the Abyss will and fuse with a portion of the Abyss's source. Strictly speaking, all true Abyss kings have become a part of the origin of the Abyss. It's impossible for me to become your servant. After pausing for a moment, he still said these words that were extremely humiliating and infuriating. Qin put on an enlightened expression. He nodded. "So that's how it is. It seems this junior is ignorant." He paused for a moment before continuing. "Then let's change the condition. Senior, please stay by my side for a period of time. Let's tentatively set it as 100 years. Once the time limit is over, you will regain your freedom." He looked at King Xuanzi. To a true king, 100 years is nothing more than the blink of an eye. Compared to life or death, it isn't worth mentioning at all. Moreover, Junior guarantees that during this period of time, I will give Senior sufficient respect. This was a type of negotiation technique. First put forth a request that was absolutely impossible. After being rejected, one could retreat and ask for the next best thing. This way, it wouldn't be easy to be rejected again. Moreover, Qin words were extremely tempting. Compared to life or death, 100 years was nothing at all. King Xuanzi's complexion was cloudy and uncertain. Flames burned in his heart, burning his eyes red. As a formidable true king with a netherworld king bloodline, when had he ever felt threatened like this? Very well, I agree. If he could suppress Qin, then he could think of a way to force out everything from his mouth. But King Xuanzi didn't have full confidence. This was because Qin performance just now had been far too fierce. Who knew what other cards this brat had in his hands? If he provoked him, he couldn't die. He was alive and well. So how could he die? 100 years would pass in a flash. At that time, he could think of a way to settle accounts with Qin. Humph, humph, humph. Did he really think that he wouldn't need to pay a price to humiliate a solemn, true king? Qin smiled. King Xuanzi, don't worry. I will soon help you take away the undying body fragment that has fused with your shadow. As he spoke to her, he looked at King Xuanzi, and his smile became even brighter. With a stuffy cough, King Xuanzi clenched his teeth and said, I swear upon my source that I will follow Qin for 100 years. If I violate this oath, I will be rejected by the abyss. An invisible, binding force immediately appeared. This was an instinct of the abyss's will and wouldn't arouse its attention. Chinyu felt this binding force, and his heart relaxed. Although he had a high chance that King Xuanzi wouldn't turn hostile because of this, before things had truly come to an end, any change could occur. Now, the situation had truly entered into a rhythm that Chinyu controlled. Elder Arcane Magic felt as if he had just watched a wonderful drama. Although, strictly speaking, this drama was dry and the time it lasted was extremely short. Whether it was wonderful or not depended on the content. A solemn, true king of the abyss was actually forced by a demon commander level junior to bow his head and be ordered around for 100 years. Well, even if this brat Yu was incomparably abnormal and couldn't be viewed with common sense, he was still only a demon commander. Throughout the endless years of the abyss, let alone seeing something like this, they had never even heard of it. It was simply inconceivable. This was, without a doubt, a great show. Once this matter was spread out, King Xuanzi's old face would be thoroughly lost. The entire Netherworld royal bloodline would also be covered in dirt. This matter slightly washed away the gloominess of not having obtained anything in the end. But Elder Arcane Magic's attitude of watching the fun didn't last too long. As he felt Qin Yu's eyes fall on him, his heart chilled, and he revealed a vigilant look. What did this brat want to do? He never imagined that a solemn, true king of the abyss would reveal such an expression because of a junior's gaze. This was truly shameful. Qin Yu said, "Elder Arcane Magic, can you keep today's matters a secret?" Arcane Magic's heart chilled. He immediately thought of a possibility and said, "Of course. I can guarantee that I will not tell anyone." Qin Yu waved his hand. "I don't believe you. Arcane Magic, bastard, if you don't believe me, then why are you asking me? Are you deliberately playing with me?" Qin Yu turned his head. "King Xuanzi, do you believe me? After all, I need time." King Xuanzi was silent. This silence clearly represented some sort of attitude, because he already understood what Qin Yu was saying. The shadow of betrayal had been destroyed, but there was still a remnant left on his body. In normal circumstances, the chances of the will of the abyss detecting it were very small, but what if someone reported it? The abyssal demon dragon race had obtained the recognition of the abyss. If they made a small report, it would be far too easy. Perhaps they could even obtain a reward from the abyss. This was such a simple matter. Even if King Xuanzi thought about it, if he were in Qin Yu's shoes, he would also be tempted. Of course, there was another hidden reason that couldn't be said out loud. That was, why was he the only one who was unlucky? You're a true king of the abyss, but so am I. Since I've fallen into a pit, it would be best if I could pull someone else down with me. At the very least, I could make that old demon dragon Arcane Magic shut up and never speak of this shameful matter. Qin Yu looked away. "Elder Arcane Magic, look, even King Xuanzi doesn't believe me." Elder Arcane Magic's complexion paled and his eyes darkened. He roared, "Qin Yu, do not forget that I came here today in accordance with the contract to help you. This is how you repay kindness with enmity." Qin Yu said, "The reason you gave me the contract is because someone has given you enough benefits. This is only a transaction. I don't owe you anything." As he spoke, he lifted a hand and pointed a finger forward. An invisible aura was released, pouring into the ancestral land space. It was still broken and hadn't been completely repaired. But at this moment, it suddenly restored a bit of its imprisoning ability. It hadn't reached its peak, but even a true king of the abyss couldn't instantly shatter it. In other words, that old dragon Arcane Magic could forget about escaping. This brief delay was enough for King Xuanzi to stop him. The face of the angry Arcane Magic stiffened. He stared at Qin Yu, an ominous light flashing in his eyes. This hateful little bastard. He had been secretly gathering his strength just now so that he could shatter the space of the ancestral land and escape from here. But before he could do anything, Qin Yu had moved, completely blocking off his escape route. Smart enough and decisive enough. You're ruthless enough. Elder Arcane Magic wasn't in the mood to continue acting. He coldly said, "Speak, what do you want?" He glanced at the silent King Xuanzi. I'm warning you in advance. Do not try to make any impossible requests. If worst comes to worst, I will fight you. You might not be able to keep me here. Qin Yu said, Of course, I believe that Senior does indeed possess such formidable strength. But I also believe that you should understand that if Junior joins forces with King Xuanzi, there is still a small chance that we can kill you. Elder Arcane Magic remained silent. This was because he knew that Qin Yu wasn't wrong. Qin Yu's lips curved up in a smile. So, this Junior's request is that you give me another contract, just like the previous one. Arcane Magic's complexion instantly became ugly. As he looked at Qin Yu's smiling face, he gnashed his teeth together, wishing he could tear Qin Yu into pieces and chew him to pieces. This little bastard, when he first gave him a contract, he ended up in such a situation. If he gave him another contract, would he end up any better? Perhaps he would even be toyed to death. No. Just as he was about to speak, he was interrupted. Qin Yu had a serious expression. Elder Arcane Magic, what Junior says is true. Please consider it and don't make things difficult for me. If I could choose, I really wouldn't want to be enemies with a formidable existence like you. Was this a form of flattery? But who cared about that? Arcane Dharma wished he could slap Qin Yu to smithereens. This damn brat. He was clearly threatening him. Finally, Arcane Magic chose to agree. This was because when the contract was signed, he tacitly agreed that he couldn't harm Qin Yu. Otherwise, he would suffer a backlash from the contract. Since King Xuanzi and Qin Yu's interests were one, this also guaranteed that Arcane Magic wouldn't reveal anything. This little bastard. He was quite thoughtful. Qin Yu put away the contract and bowed. Farewell, Senior Arcane Magic. Humph. Arcane Magic flicked his sleeves and shattered space. The moment he stepped in, Qin Yu's voice sounded out once more. Teacher Liao gave me something just now. He said that it might be useful to you. Consider this Junior's apology. Pa. Arcane Magic reached out and grasped the demon crystal. After determining that there was no threat, he probed it with his divine sense. In the next moment, his body shook. He took a deep breath and glanced at Qin Yu. Then, without hesitation, he stepped into the spatial crack. Shua. Arcane Magic's aura vanished. King Xuanzi wanted to know just what Qin Yu had left in the demon crystal that could cause the old demon dragon to reveal such a shocked expression. He glanced at Qin Yu. He originally thought that this boy would explain, but Qin Yu didn't do so. Senior King Xuanzi, before we leave, we should make some preparations. After all, I will need Senior to help me put on a play. The entire Evil Peaks city fell into a deathly silence. Countless eyes widened, bulging out like fish out of oxygen, their faces dull and lifeless. This was because the vortex in the skies had suddenly shattered. That's right, without any warning, like a bubble, it completely disappeared with a pop sound. In the records of the nightmare race, this had never happened before. No one knew just what had happened. But without a doubt, a massive change had occurred. They urgently wanted to know what sort of impact this change would have and what sort of changes it would bring to the nightmare race. But now, all they could do was wait. Just at this moment, the sky above Irfing City was suddenly shattered. A figure appeared from within and took a step out. Chapter 1152. The Demon Dragon Race's Elder AOFA. How could it be him? Ancient King Clan leader, old King Clan leader, and new faction Hongchang's expressions changed at the same time, and they subconsciously took a step forward. Without waiting for them to speak, Offa shouted in a low voice with a cold expression, "The new Nightmare King has been born. It's just behind us." With that, he took a step forward, tore open space again, and vanished. A new king has been born? Who could it be? What had happened in the ancestors' land? It was as if 100 claws were scratching at his heart. If it wasn't for that old demonic dragon, Offa, being extremely powerful and his back being shockingly large, he would have long since been captured and interrogated. As for now, the only choice was to continue waiting. Fortunately, the anxious wait did not last for too long. The sky shattered once more, and a figure appeared once more. At first, it was blurry, but it quickly became clear. Yin Wuya's eyes widened in ecstasy, and he couldn't help but throw his head back and laugh heartily. Qinyu. It was Qinyu. His laughter resounded throughout the entire Evil Peak city. In the azure tile courtyard, when Yunlan heard Yin Wuya's laughter, he immediately relaxed, and a smile appeared on his pale face. He won. Qinyu stepped out from the shattered space. That's right, he was alone. His eyes fell on the ancient king patriarch, the old king patriarch, and the new faction's red dress. After pausing for a moment, he smiled. 3 clan leaders, do you have any objections to me seizing the throne? A sliver of pressure was released from his body, and the expressions of the 3 nameless true monarchs changed. The pressure of the true Abyss King was not wrong, and this aura was indeed the pure aura of the King of Nightmares. But for some reason, when they looked at Qinyu, they felt that something was wrong. The old royal family patriarch's eyes flashed. He was the first to step forward and bow. Nightmare Yin family patriarch greets my king. No matter what, Qinyu represented the old king's bloodline. If he were to seize the throne in the end, that would be the best result for them. Hong Chong was the second to bow. Her bright eyes fell on Qinyu's face. Hong Chong greets my king. The Guwang clan leader sighed in his heart, but he knew that the current situation was beyond his control. He respectfully followed behind the 2 and bowed. Greetings, your majesty. In the next moment, all the demons in Erfing City knelt on the ground. Bang! Above the endless vault of heaven, an aura suddenly descended. It was boundless and vast, instantly pouring into Qinyu's body. His black robe fluttered even though there was no wind, and a powerful aura erupted in an instant. The oppressive aura that belonged to the true Abyssal King swept out in all directions. This was the recognition of the will of the Abyss. The aura that fused into Qinyu's body was the strength of the source of the Abyss. It represented the confirmation of his status as the King of Nightmares. There are no surprises. Qinyu's heart relaxed. He swept his eyes over the prostrating ancient king, old king, and new faction. He lightly said, I know that all 3 of you are curious and puzzled. Come with me to the blue tile courtyard. If I can explain, I won't hide anything. Of course, it would be fake if he didn't hide it. But since Qinyu hoped to truly grasp the position of the King of Nightmares, he had to think of a way to dispel the suspicions of these 3 old demons. Otherwise, he, the fake King of Nightmares, wouldn't be able to suppress the 3 nameless monarchs. He would be defeated if he wasn't careful. A moment later, in the hall of the blue tile courtyard, Qinyu's former residence. He sat in the seat of honor. He lifted a hand and pointed a finger in the air. An invisible imprisoning strength immediately descended, completely sealing off the inside and outside. Feeling this imprisoning strength, the complexions of the ancient King Patriarch, old King Patriarch, and Hong Chong all changed. So strong. Moreover, he gave them a faint feeling of threat. The strength that Qinyu displayed right now was far greater than what the new faction king had displayed before. In the Abyss, strength was the true status. The expressions that the 3 old demons revealed became a bit more restrained. Qinyu said, the ancestral land has been destroyed. That existence that exists within will never appear again. The complexions of the ancient King Patriarch, old King Patriarch, and Hong Chong changed. They never thought that Qinyu's first words would contain such explosive news. The ancestral land had really been destroyed before, when the vortex vanished. They already had a faint guess in their hearts. In the end, this was the nightmare ancestral land, and its aura was connected to the entire tribe. As the true monarchs of their tribe, they were certainly able to sense it. But now that they received confirmation from Qinyu's own mouth, the impact of their emotions still shook their hearts. Qinyu waited for a moment, allowing them to digest this news. Then, he continued to say, now, the 3 of you can ask your questions. I must say in advance that there are some secrets that I can only conceal. Hong Chong was the first to speak. Just who is that existence within the ancestral land? She paused for a moment, her tone becoming increasingly urgent. Or, to be more precise, what is his relationship with the Nightmare tribe? Qin Yu glanced at her and said, "That one, strictly speaking, should be considered a parasite hidden within the nightmare race." Of course, saying that he is the old ancestor of the nightmare tribe isn't wrong, because it is because of his existence that the nightmare tribe has its current status. Hong Chang frowned. She clearly wasn't satisfied with this explanation. Qin Yu waved his hand, interrupting her before she could speak. "I know what you want to say. Fine, I can tell you the truth. But this matter is far too important and cannot be revealed in the slightest. Otherwise, the nightmare tribe will be exterminated." The ancient king patriarch, old king patriarch, and Hong Chang sucked in a deep breath, their heartbeats instinctively accelerating. Qin Yu's eyes swept over the three of them. He slowly said, "The existence within the ancestral land is a shadow of the abyss." Then he explained the situation. Simply put, it was 90% true and 10% false. After Qin Yu's words were processed, the story was still the same, but it had a different flavor. As the three old demons listened, their complexions changed again and again. They constantly verified what they already knew, and then everything matched up. No wonder, as long as one was chosen to enter the ancestral land and seize the throne, they could directly become a true abyssal king. No wonder all previous abyssal kings, no matter what race they came from, gave off an essential feeling of familiarity. No wonder the relationship between the ancestral land and the nightmare tribe wasn't close at all, and even gave off an icy cold feeling of plundering. A shadow that developed its own will and resisted the abyss, unwilling to dissipate so. This was the reason why the nightmare tribe was able to rise. But was he really just a simple shadow? Moreover, this shadow had vanished. In other words, the nightmare tribe had lost their ancestral land. Although they had already thought of this possibility, when they truly faced the present situation, they still instinctively felt lost. In the future, would the nightmare tribe still be able to maintain their status today? Or could it be said that with the disappearance of the ancestral land, they would inevitably fall into a state of weakness and eventually collapse? The old king patriarch slowly said, "Although this is a bit offensive, I still have to ask, what is your true identity?" Qin Yu could feel the eyes that gathered on him. It was clear this was one of the things they cared about the most right now. It was no less important than the true secret of the ancestral land. This was because Qin Yu was the current nightmare king. He controlled the entire tribe and could control the future and rise and fall of the tribe. The will of the abyss cannot be disobeyed. Since a shadow of betrayal was born, it would naturally think of a way to thoroughly erase it. Marquis Qianjun was an executor, but his actions were too slow. Thus, I appeared to erase the mistake and return everything to the right track. Qin Yu faintly smiled. "This is my identity." He didn't directly answer, but this answer was clearly enough. The ancient king patriarch, the old king patriarch, and Hong Chang nodded inwardly, thinking that this was indeed the case. Like this, the identity of Marquis Qianjun had been taken. Moreover, the matter of his sudden disappearance had been quietly resolved. There was no need for a useless executor to continue existing. It was normal for him to be eliminated by the will of the abyss. Moreover, Qin Yu's actions had caused the three old demons to believe his words even more. This was because they had long suspected Marquis Qianjun, and now that they had confirmed many things, everything became clearer. At this point, the three old demons believed 70 to 80% of Qin Yu's words. In fact, this was already a very good result. Without staying for too long, the ancient king patriarch, the old king patriarch, and Hong Chang bid their farewells and left. As he watched them leave, Qin Yu frowned. He immediately relaxed and said in a soft voice, "They are indeed cautious enough. But it doesn't matter. As long as I'm not exposed on the spot, I have passed the most difficult hurdle. From now on, I am a new Nightmare King." Even with Qin Yu's shrewdness and intelligence, he couldn't help but feel his heart surge with excitement. As a life form of the vast Yang world, he had actually become the Nightmare King of the Abyss. This was simply inconceivable. After a long time, Qin Yu took a deep breath and slowly suppressed his surging emotions. He looked down at the shadow beneath him, anticipation in his eyes. Now is the time to take inventory of my harvest. Chapter 1153. Qin Yu had never forgotten his most fundamental goal for entering the abyss. Thus, after awakening the undying body fragment of the old turtle, he directly asked about the secrets of the myriad soul Tao. This was related to Ningling's life and death. Myriad soul Tao. The old turtle thought for a moment. His complexion changed. He glanced at Qin Yu's complexion and subconsciously gulped. He wasn't an idiot. Moreover, with Qin Yu's current appearance, even an idiot could tell that there was something else going on. Could it be that he had cultivated it? No, that wasn't right. Qin Yu's soul aura was still complete. It hadn't been divided. Then what was the reason? Without giving the old turtle any more time to think, Qin Yu said, "Tell me everything you know. If you dare to hide anything, I will crush you." The old turtle's face turned green. Qin Yu's attitude was serious, and he feared things were even worse than he thought. He gulped. "Don't ask me why my shadow can also gulp. After all, this shadow is a projection of the abyss, so of course it's different. The myriad soul Tao was an experiment I made. You also know that I'm a bit afraid of death, so I always wanted to leave myself a path of retreat. Thus, I came up with an idea. I split my own consciousness and used it as a seed. Then, I would constantly strengthen myself and finally fuse them together. Perhaps that would be able to greatly increase the strength I possess. The Qi that you worked with, as well as the other shadows, were just some of my attempts. Ahem. Imagination is beautiful, but reality is often cruel. In short, I failed. The myriad soul Tao was wrong in the first place." The old turtle paused and looked at Qin Yu. He braced himself and said, "The rules do not permit it. This is a dead end in itself, one that cannot be walked." Qin Yu waved his hand, interrupting him. "Let me ask you, how can a wisp of the soul of someone who cultivates the myriad soul Tao obtain freedom?" His eyes were sharp. "The freedom I speak of is to become an independent individual, no longer restricted by the main body, and become a pure life form. Think carefully before you speak, otherwise I will crush you." It was this sentence again. The old turtle's lips twitched, and he nearly cried. Although the myriad soul Tao itself was wrong and impossible to walk, there was no doubt that it was an extremely profound cultivation method. Of course, he was imprisoned in the nightmare ancestral land, enduring loneliness and expending countless efforts to finally create this secret technique. Even if it wasn't complete, its quality was definitely top-notch. After all, the more afraid the old tortoise was of death, the more he would do his best in this matter. He would definitely serve him with all his might. Correspondingly, the myriad soul Tao's incomparably tyrannical ability. The old tortoise knew better than anyone how he came to be. Unsolvable. It was actually unsolvable. Knowing all of this, Qin Yu certainly thought of Qi Zhen. He was the shadow of the old tortoise, someone who had sought death for many years without a path to escape. From another angle, this clearly verified everything that the old tortoise had said. The split soul of the myriad soul Tao would never be free. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu looked down at the shivering old tortoise who had curled up into a ball in fear. His tone was icy cold. "Even if my main body cultivates the myriad soul Tao and cuts off the connection between the two sides, can I still not obtain freedom?" The old tortoise really wanted to cry. His body shook like a sieve, and he sullenly shook his head. "No. You can't. Once the connection between the two sides is severed, the split soul will vanish." Rumble, rumble. The roar of thunder rose up. Trillions of bolts of lightning tore through the darkness, illuminating Qin Yu's tightly shut eyes and his shivering body. The old tortoise miserably screamed. Faint traces of lightning fell onto his body like long whips, leaving behind countless bloody marks. He rolled back and forth on the ground, not daring to resist at all. He could only passively withstand all of this. Yu had to admit that at this moment, his killing intent had been aroused. He wished he could tear the old tortoise to shreds. But he was well aware that if it weren't for the old tortoise creating the myriad soul Tao, he wouldn't have had the chance to meet Ning Ling, nor would he have had those memories of being together with her. This was because she shouldn't have appeared in the vast Yang world. It was only because of the existence of the myriad soul Tao that she was able to meet him. Moreover, even if he really killed the old tortoise, so what? Everything had already been decided and nothing could be changed. The skies were still dark and gloomy. The roar of thunder gradually faded away. The old tortoise, who had just escaped death, slumped to the ground and began to cry out loud. He was truly afraid. Just now, that clear and despairing smell of death had wrapped around him. Compared to when he was in the nightmare ancestral land, it was even more terrifying. The old tortoise feared death, but this was the first time he had been so close to death. Then, he discovered that death was far more terrifying than he had imagined. Tears and snot flowed down his face. Even though Yu's heart was heavy at this time, his lips still twitched as he looked at the old tortoise. This fellow, to fear death to such a degree, he could be considered a freak of nature. He had entered the abyss to search for a way to unravel the myriad soul Tao. But who would have thought that the final result would be like this? For a time, Yu was at a loss. What should he do next? Should he leave the abyss? His eyes flashed several times. Finally, a sharp light flashed in them. That's right, it was time for him to leave. Return to vast Yang. Return to Ning Ling's side. He forced himself to calm down. His thoughts raced. Although he couldn't completely rescue Ning Ling, if he was strong enough to threaten the Peach Blossom Spring Master, then he would naturally be able to force the woman who planted the peach not to take back Ning Ling's soul fragment. She would still have a long time to live. Taking a step back, this was the only method Yu could think of in his current situation. The bloody scars on the surface of the old tortoise rapidly disappeared. He looked at Yu with fear in his eyes and wiped away his snot and tears. In truth, this isn't necessarily true. There isn't even the slightest possibility. Even though I am the shadow of the abyss, my strength is limited. If I can find someone powerful enough to help me, then perhaps I might be able to forcefully break through the imprisonment of the myriad soul Tao. Yu looked down at him. The old tortoise screamed in fear. It's true, what I said is true. There are no absolutes in this world. The impossibilities that you and I see now are only for the current situation. If one is strong enough, then anything is possible. Yu's eyes brightened. That's right, his mind had been wounded just now and his emotions were in chaos, so he hadn't thought of this. Although the old tortoise was the creator of the myriad soul Tao, no matter how extraordinary he was only a shadow of the abyss. Facing the myriad soul Tao, the old tortoise was helpless. But what if the will of the abyss personally attacked? That might not necessarily be impossible. As soon as Yu thought of this, he was excited. As long as there was a chance, there was no need to feel despair. Even though he was well aware that asking the will of the abyss to help was nearly impossible, at the very least, this was a ray of hope. As long as Ning Ling lived and continued to live, sooner or later there would be a day when Yu would be able to move the will of the abyss or an existence on the same level as him. In fact, it might even be possible for him to grow into an existence comparable to the will of the abyss. Time was endless. Who could be sure what the future held? In the past, he was as low as an ant. Because of his old wounds, he had struggled to survive in the fear of death. How could he have imagined that he would have such a day? Seeing Yu's complexion improve and the deathly stillness and coldness in his eyes dissipate, the old tortoise wanted to cry again. Of course, he wasn't afraid. Rather, he was happy. It seemed that he could continue living today. He didn't want to experience such a scene ever again. After sobbing a few times, the old tortoise wanted to continue showing off his value. Like this, even if there came a day in the future when he accidentally offended Yu again, he could still see that he still had some value, so that Yu wouldn't casually say that he would break him to pieces. Cough, cough. In truth, Master, there's the aura of a formidable existence on your body. Although she isn't strong to the point where she can compare with the will of the abyss, the difference isn't too great. If you can ask her to help, there might be a chance. Chinyu thought the old tortoise was speaking of the little blue lamp. He shook his head. His current strength isn't enough. In order to control the source mark of the old tortoise, he had learned a little about the existence of the little blue lamp. The old tortoise blinked. I'm not referring to that great lady, but another. He scratched his head. I can't sense it too clearly. That great lady should be a woman. She once sent her strength to your side. Chinyu immediately realized that the old tortoise was referring to Teacher Liao. That was right. He could still ask Teacher Liao for help. He didn't know how many years it would take for the little blue lamp to restore its strength. But without a doubt, Teacher Liao was an incomparably formidable existence. There was no need to doubt this. For her to be able to send a projection into the abyss and suppress the demon dragon race's elder sublime magic, just these 2 points were enough to prove her strength. Although he didn't know why Teacher Liao had appeared by his side and why she would help him with everything she had, but since she was willing to help him, that proved that Chinyu was worth it. It wasn't impossible for him to ask her to help him again. Strictly speaking, he hadn't spent much time with Liao, sure, but the relationship between the two of them was extremely close. Chinyu was confident he could persuade her. That's right, you're right. I can ask Teacher Liao for help. Chinyu whispered to himself, excitement on his face. Seeing his words accepted, the old tortoise smiled. Teacher Liao? Is it the name of that formidable existence? Since she was willing to send a projection to your side, she naturally has a close relationship with you. If Master personally comes to ask for help, she will definitely agree. Chinyu was startled. As he looked at the old tortoise in front of him, he suddenly felt as if he had overlooked something. It was crucial. What was it? Being stared at by Chinyu, the old tortoise stiffened. Everything was fine just now. So what happened in the blink of an eye? Chinyu, can you not be so moody? It's so scary. The old tortoise roared inwardly, but he didn't dare to reveal any of his thoughts. He could only brace himself and ask, Master, what is it? Chinyu took a deep breath, his eyes uncertain. After several breaths of silence, he slowly said, Why aren't you willing to disappear? The syllables were a bit rough. The old tortoise was startled. Was there even a need to ask this? Disappearing meant death, and dying meant the end. My love for the abyss is so deep, so how could I be willing to die like this? He coughed and glanced at Chinyu. This was normal, so why would he ask such an abnormal question? Master, if I disappear, I will die. Chinyu waved his hand. You are only a shadow of the abyss. If you disappear and return to the abyss, you will still have your memories. The abyss is you, and you are the abyss. So how can you say you are dead? The old tortoise looked at Chinyu. He thought that Chinyu was so fierce, and yet he didn't even know this sort of thing. His level was a bit low. He secretly despised Chinyu for a moment, and then hurriedly replied, Master, things aren't what you think. How should I say this? Take me as an example. A long time ago, the will of the abyss passed through the skies above a great lake and inadvertently revealed a trace of its aura, thus creating a shadow on the surface of the lake. This is how I was born. After the initial period of ignorance, I awakened my consciousness and stayed in the great lake for many years, until one day, I suddenly received an order from the will of the abyss. It seemed to have suddenly sensed the existence of my shadow, and then it didn't want me to continue existing. The old tortoise had an ugly complexion and a gloomy expression. It was clear that even though countless years had passed, that feeling from that time still left him unhappy. I almost died. It was only when I was about to completely disappear that I regained my composure. Why should I obediently disappear? So I ran away. I ran away for many years, and as for what happened afterwards, I'm sure Master already knows. The old tortoise looked at Chinyu and took a deep breath. I am saying all of this because I want to explain it to Master. If I disappear, I will completely disappear. What you said is correct. My memories still exist, but to the endless years that the will of the abyss has existed for, this is only a moment. It won't be noticed at all, and it is impossible for it to affect my main body in the slightest. Furthermore, the instant I disappear, my own memories will also be erased. It will be as if I had never existed in the first place. So, to me, vanishing is true death. In this world, there will no longer be any trace of me. Chapter 1154. Qin Yu remained silent. In this moment, countless images appeared in his mind. That smug smile, that arrogant smile, that dazed woman who snapped her fingers several times in front of him. No wonder Liao Shi placed the potion she refined in a special bottle and even wrote the name of the number 1 demon refiner in the abyss on it. So she was worried that she would be forgotten and wanted to use this method to leave behind a trace of her existence in the abyss. In the last 10 days, Liao Shi should have already known what would happen to her. It was no wonder she had such a reaction. Qin Yu thought back to the last morning when Liao Shi looked at the weak worms in the puddles of water. Her heart must have been filled with panic and fear. Within his sleeves, Qin Yu clenched his fists and closed his eyes. Liao Shi's figure became increasingly clear in his mind. On the day Liao Shi disappeared, Qin Yu already knew that she was the shadow of some formidable existence. But he didn't understand what the disappearance of Shadow meant. But today he finally understood. He owed her so many favors. He originally thought that he would find a chance to repay her in the future, but now it seemed that he would never have such a chance. Perhaps in the future, Qin Yu would meet a woman who looked exactly like Liao Shi, and she would likely recognize him. But she wasn't Liao Shi, because this name, along with the gradually transparent woman in his arms that day, had disappeared forever. Are you really dead? You know what I mean, so I want you to answer me very seriously. Of course, it's not real. Boy, we will meet again. I'm tired. I'm going to sleep for a bit. Qin Yu turned around. Tears appeared in the corners of his eyes. He took a deep breath, but couldn't suppress the surging emotions in his chest. In truth, he had very complex feelings towards Liao Shi. On one hand, because of her mysterious and unclear origins, he still held a trace of fear towards her. On the other hand, he felt a deep gratitude towards her. The two of them hadn't interacted much. After a period of time, they had hurriedly parted ways. At most, they could only be considered friends. But now, Liao Shi had used her death to ruthlessly cut open a wound in Qin Yu's heart. When she said she was tired and wanted to sleep for a bit, she was saying goodbye to him. To Qin Yu, Liao Shi was only a passerby in his life, a meteor that vanished without a trace. But to Liao Shi, Qin Yu was someone who had existed in her entire life, a witness to her short life. That was why she didn't care about trifles in front of Qin Yu. She was willing to let him take advantage of her and then laugh at his embarrassing appearance. Perhaps this was also her subconscious hope that Qin Yu's impression of her would deepen. In the cave, Liao Shi leaned into Qin Yu's chest on his own initiative. He fell asleep in his arms and vanished. In Liao Shi's heart, Qin Yu was the closest and most trustworthy person in her short life. Perhaps when she was in Qin Yu's arms, when she welcomed the arrival of death, she would feel less fear. The old turtle didn't know what he had said wrong, but it was clear that there was something wrong with Qin Yu's current mood. He was smart enough not to say anything more. He lowered his head and curled his body slightly. He wished he could slap himself in the face. What was he talking about? It has nothing to do with you. Qin Yu's voice was hoarse. He paused for a moment and then continued, "Moreover, I should thank you. Thank you for letting me know that I have already lost a very good friend." Shua. Qin Yu's figure vanished from the world of his mind. In the outside world, he opened his eyes and wiped his face. A cold sweat soaked his fingers. It turned out that he was really crying. This sort of expression hadn't appeared on Qin Yu for a very, very long time. "Liao Shi, you really are a troublemaker." Qin Yu took a deep breath. He revolved his demonic energy, dispelling the tears on his face and his eyes. After a long period of silence, his lips curled up in a bitter smile. He thought that today was truly a sad day. He had received 2 pieces of bad news in a row. Ning Ling could not escape. Liao Shi had died, but this was fate. You never knew what you would receive in the next moment. Would it be the sweetness of candy or the bitterness of gold thread? But no matter what it was, life had to continue. All you could do was accept it and get used to it. But fate could also be changed. But what was needed to change fate was a sufficiently formidable strength. Although Qin Yu had become the new king of nightmares and stepped into the peak of the abyss, he was still far from being able to grasp the throat of fate. He lowered his head and looked up again. Qin Yu's expression became tranquil once more. He calmly looked out the window at the night sky that was different from that of the vast Yang world. A thought became increasingly clear in his mind. He really should go back. With the birth of a new nightmare king, the many undercurrents that had gathered rapidly vanished. Everything returned to tranquility. With a king presiding over the nightmare race, their strength had returned to its peak. Unless one was tired of living, no one would be willing to provoke them. According to the traditions of the nightmare race, when a new king was born, a grand coronation ceremony would be held. Guests would be invited from all over, and they would use this opportunity to formally inform all sides. They would also confirm and change the various agreements made during the era of the previous king. Qin Yu had no reason to refuse this matter, so he nodded in agreement. But he didn't plan on wasting time. He formally summoned the leaders of the nightmare race, and after making a series of arrangements, he announced that he would go into seclusion. He had entered the abyss because of Liao Shi. Although she had never said it, Qin Yu knew this was the case. But Liao Shi was no longer here. If Qin Yu wanted to return to the vast Yang world, he could only rely on himself. This certainly wasn't a simple matter. But the good news was that as the new Nightmare King, Qin Yu could easily obtain any information he wanted and look up any ancient texts he was interested in. And most importantly, with the little blue lamp's help, Qin Yu had subdued the death-fearing old turtle. As the shadow of the abyss, he knew many things. Of course, even though Qin Yu was determined to leave the abyss, the truth was that there were still many matters he needed to deal with before he left. For instance, after he left, what would be done with the Nightmare King throne? Before, he had said that he would return the throne to the bloodline of the previous king. But now that they knew his true identity, the bloodline of the ancient king certainly didn't dare to make such a request. In the end, the abyss and the vast Yang world were hostile existences. And regardless of whether or not there were hidden secrets, if it weren't for Liao Shi, it would have been impossible for Qin Yu to have such thoughts. In the eyes of the life forms of the vast Yang world, all abyssal life forms should be destroyed. In short, controlling the Nightmare King throne was the best choice. At the very least, he could help the vast Yang world place a high-level chess piece into the abyss. My name is He Tiangang, and I come from the three-headed Hellhound clan. I am a member of the royal bloodline of the abyss, and I was born with an outstanding bloodline. When I was young, others envied me and complimented me. I once believed that I would become a great figure in the abyss. Indeed, the first half of my life went as smoothly as I imagined. I broke into the Demon Commander realm, and my entire family cheered for me. A bright future slowly opened up for me. I once fantasized that I would one day break through the limits of my bloodline and become a true abyssal king. But accidents always came suddenly. I received heavy injuries, and although I managed to maintain my boundary, my bloodline withered away and my path of cultivation was severed. My status plummeted. Because of my arrogance in the first half of my life, my family and I had to pay a heavy price. There were indeed people who kicked me when I was down, but most of them had only themselves to blame. This was something I had to acknowledge. In the end, I left the royal bloodline and entered Giant Deer City. I became the master of Merry Forest and used this as a punishment for myself in exchange for the safety of my family. That was a truly wasted period of time. Every day, I lived in pain and suffering. Perhaps the reason why I named it Merry Forest was because it was what I desired the most in the depths of my heart. But although the name was simple, living a happy life was extremely difficult. It was only on that day that I met Miss Liao Shi and the young master that the gears of my destiny were turned once more. Then, I became who I am today. What the Miss said was right. The young master inherited a great destiny and will complete the great cause of unifying the abyss. Otherwise, how could it be explained that he had suddenly become the new king of the nightmare race? Fine, to be honest, I had some doubts about Miss Liao Shi's words before. It was just that the mist was strong enough and could give enough benefits, so I chose to tacitly accept it. But now I truly believe it. If anyone dares to doubt the young master, I will be the first to break their head. The young master is the one chosen by the heavens. Becoming the new king of the nightmare tribe is just a springboard for him to start the war to unify the abyss. And because of this great cause, he will obtain inconceivable achievements. I, He Tiangang, vow to be loyal to the young master. I will overcome all obstacles for the young master, no matter the cost. His dazed thoughts were suddenly interrupted. The iron-armored guard knelt on the ground and respectfully said, "Lord He Tiangang, the ceremony is about to begin." A sharp light flashed in He Tiangang's eyes. He slowly stood up. He wore the heavy armor of the nightmare demons. The complex patterns on it were not only beautiful, but they also represented a terrifying defensive power. His current status was that of the commander of the guards under the throne, one of the strongest combat forces of the nightmare tribe. His status was roughly the same as the previous Marquis, Qianjun. He was below one and above all others. The armor collided with each other, emitting loud, crashing sounds. He Tiangang lifted a hand and waved it forward. "Go!" With a loud shout, the throne guards rushed out like a flood. They divided into two thick black lines that extended out of the royal hall. The coronation ceremony of the new Nightmare King had officially begun. Walala, with He Tiangang at the lead, countless throne guards knelt on the ground. They shouted out loud like thunder, "We welcome the king's ascension to the throne." Their roars were filled with endless dignity and dignity. They instantly erupted and shot into the skies. The doors to the hall opened. Qin Yu, dressed in a wide black royal robe, stepped out. He narrowed his eyes and looked up at the skies. His lips curved in a smile. Then, he lowered his head and looked at He Tiangang, who was respectfully kneeling on the ground. He smiled and said, "My most trusted commander of the guards, come with me." He strode forward. He Tiangang looked up. His eyes fell on Qin Yu's back. There was a trace of hesitation in his eyes. The young master was indeed the young master. The connection between them couldn't be faked, but for some reason, it gave him a strange feeling. It was a faint sense of alienation. Perhaps it was because the young master was now the new Nightmare King. Shaking his head and suppressing this thought, He Tiangang stood up and followed behind. The coronation ceremony went smoothly. Qin Yu, who was surrounded by countless abyssal demons, accepted the greetings and congratulations, performed flawlessly in all aspects. Chapter 1155. The Abyss and Vast Yang World were certainly connected. If this weren't the case, there wouldn't have been a great calamity that involved the destruction of trillions of lives between the two worlds. But because of that tragic war, the channel between the two worlds had been forcefully sealed. It was condensed from the strength of the world, and not even a true abyssal king was able to forcefully break it. The current method to enter Vast Yang World was to pass through the cracks between the two worlds that hadn't been sealed. But these cracks were far too small and couldn't accommodate a complete abyssal life form. Only by abandoning his mortal body and remaining in a pure soul state could he risk being torn apart and squeezed through the cracks and enter Vast Yang World. Qin Yu certainly couldn't accept this method. It wasn't just because of the risks, but also because of his mortal body. Although he could seize another body after abandoning it, in the end, it wasn't his original body. Moreover, Qin Yu's mortal body was so formidable that he couldn't abandon it. Moreover, things weren't so simple. If it were just Qin Yu alone, then with the strength of the nightmare demon race, they might be able to think of a way. But in truth, the old turtle was also leaving the abyss. The little blue lamp had taken a risk and finally subdued him. It had clearly told Qin Yu that he would rather abandon his mortal body than abandon him. This was because of the time immortal body and also because of the pure strength of the will of the abyss contained within the old turtle. Whether it was Qin Yu or the little blue lamp, the existence of the old turtle was of paramount importance. They absolutely couldn't afford to lose him. This was the key point. Strictly speaking, the old turtle was a part of the will of the abyss. Taking him away from the abyss was essentially cutting off a piece of flesh from the will of the abyss. This was simply seeking death. This was because it was impossible to conceal this matter from the will of the abyss. The moment he was discovered, all it would need was a single thought to send Qin Yu beyond redemption. Thus, there is only one choice left for Qin Yu. He had to find an incomparably sturdy and large channel that could conceal it from the will of the abyss. At the very least, before he left, he wouldn't be detected. Only then could he smoothly return to the vast Yang world. With so many restrictions, especially concealing himself from the will of the abyss, the difficulty of returning to the vast Yang world would increase by more than 100 times. Combining the information he obtained from the nightmare demon race, as well as asking the old turtle, Qin Yu had an approximate idea, but he didn't have absolute confidence it would work. Leaning against the soft and comfortable couch, Qin Yu took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He rubbed his temples, revealing a bit of weariness. At this time, he was sitting quietly in the carriage. His face was pale from lack of blood vitality, and he seemed somewhat weak. "Where are we?" On the other side, Mianya replied respectfully, "Young master, I've asked around just now. It will probably take another day before we can enter the next layer of the abyss." "Yes," Qin Yu nodded. He placed his hands behind his head, his eyes piercing through the transparent roof of the car and looking at the gray skies. It seemed that as they went deeper, the light became dimmer and dimmer. Even when it was daybreak, it was the same. Of course, the transparent roof was only for the passengers inside the car. The outside world could not see what was inside. Mianya glanced at the lazy Qin Yu. She thought for a moment and then turned to pour a cup of tea, offering it to him with both hands. "Thank you." Qin Yu received it. As he sipped his tea, he continued to look up at the skies. Sometimes his eyes focused, and sometimes they scattered. It was unknown what he was thinking. Mianya was already used to his actions. Seeing that Qin Yu didn't have any other orders, she quietly sat down in a corner. Looking at the skies was a very interesting matter. It was only today that Qin Yu began to understand just what Liao Shi meant when he said he wanted to take a good look at the abyss. It turned out that the so-called experienced and knowledgeable were very reasonable. The more one looked at the abyss, the clearer one would be able to see things and understand some things. As he walked, he looked up at the skies, apart from sleeping. This was because these days since he left the nightmare demon race were all of Qin Yu's experiences. In a trance, Qin Yu didn't know how long he looked at the skies. Then, he put down the empty teacup and helplessly sighed. His current state was far too weak. He had no idea how long it would take for him to recover. Qin Yu closed his eyes and fell asleep once more. His face was still pale as before. Old Fox rode a dragon horse, quietly following behind the carriage. His eyes occasionally swept over the person driving the carriage, subconsciously revealing a look of awe. Then, pride gushed out from the depths of his heart. "My young master is fierce." He was even able to subdue a true abyssal king. In the future, unifying the abyss is certain. In the shadows of the carriage, a pair of eyes peeked out. They saw Old Fox's expression and then revealed a mocking expression. "Old thing, don't be surprised. If you were to see our young master alone threaten two true abyssal kings from the left and a shadow of betrayal from the right, wouldn't your eyes pop out of their sockets?" Suddenly, there was a light knocking sound from within the carriage. Then Mianya's voice sounded out. "Young master has ordered us to rest here today." The carriage stopped. Monarch Schwanza turned his head and looked at the tightly shut carriage. A sharp light flashed in his eyes. As a true abyssal king, his senses were far more sensitive than the demon commander level Old Fox and Shadowless Demon. During this time, there was a subtle change in the aura of the carriage that caused him to fall silent. He turned and walked to the side. Without needing any orders, Old Fox and Shadowless Demon took the initiative to set up temporary tents. Although the young master rarely ordered them to rest, and they didn't know what the goal of this trip was, since it was the young master's will, all they needed to do was obey. The next day, as the carriage continued on its way, Monarch Schwanza could feel the changes in the aura within the carriage. He sighed inwardly. It was just as he had thought. Chinyu, his true identity, was likely not just a chess piece of some formidable existence. But thinking about it, this was also normal. After all, ordinary people didn't have the qualifications to be chosen by such a formidable existence. The skies became increasingly dark. Even though it was daytime, it still gave off a gloomy feeling, as if there was an invisible pressure. Moreover, as they hurried along the road, things began to become more difficult. From time to time, they had to stop. This was because more and more brainless demon beasts began to attack this seemingly thin group. This caused the merchant groups that were following them not too far away to break out in cold sweat countless times. But every time, they would be able to avert disaster. It was like there was an invisible monster hidden within this group that cleanly swallowed up all the demon beasts that attacked. Thus, as time passed, although people constantly left, the scale of the merchant groups continued to grow larger and larger. The shrewd and powerful merchants, no matter what background they had or how strong they were, all revealed awe in their eyes as they looked ahead. Without a doubt, this small group was the truly terrifying one. Look, there are more demon beasts attacking. It's a sunless eagle. Look at those black feathers on its body. They can even swallow light. I can't be wrong. Of course I can't be wrong. This long scar on my face was left behind by this beast. In the past, I had a group of over a dozen brothers, but in the end, I was the only one who survived. This isn't an ordinary sunless eagle. Look at its head. Its feathers are slightly raised, forming a faint ring. The color is much darker than the feathers around it. Beast King, it's about to transform. Gulp. It was unknown who gulped, but in this deathly silent environment, it was particularly clear. All they could see were incomparably pale faces. How about we run away? An ordinary sunless eagle was enough to kill off at least half of the people in the merchant group, much less this one that was clearly about to complete its transformation. Although they had personally witnessed powerful magical beasts being slaughtered one after another in front of the team, it was different this time. Could they continue to hold on? Difficult, very difficult. Those that dared to make a living as merchants in the lower regions of the abyss had to be courageous. Otherwise, there was no way they could survive here. But just because they were courageous didn't mean they didn't fear death. If they ran now, they might be able to escape, but if they waited any longer, it would be too late. Cough. Everyone, listen to me. A merchant group leader said in a deep voice. In truth, we all know that the merchant group in front tacitly agreed and allowed us to follow behind. They didn't say anything before, but now that something has happened, wouldn't it be disloyal of us to turn around and run? What if they kill off this sunless eagle? What do we do then? If we chase after them, let alone not caring about them, we can't afford to lose face. Of course, these were just words of courtesy. A group of desperate merchants that risked their lives to earn money was simply shameless. But everyone understood the meaning behind these words. They could run now, but after running away, they could forget about coming back to enjoy the treatment of opening the way. Humph, we're about to lose our lives, so why bother talking about face? If anyone wants to stay, then stay. In any case, I'm leaving. The merchant who said that his brothers had been killed by the sunless eagle sneered. The scar on his face became even more hideous as he led his men away without hesitation. He chose to be decisive because he had personally experienced the terror of the sunless eagle, not to mention the one in front of him that was even stronger. The crowd was restless, and soon, another two merchant groups walked out. Without saying goodbye, they turned around and left, quickly disappearing without a trace. With someone taking the lead, the atmosphere in the merchant group suddenly became uneasy. But in reality, this uneasiness didn't last for long. This was because they suddenly realized that the ruthless aura coming from ahead had suddenly disappeared. They raised their heads abruptly, and their eyes widened. The terrifying black shadow in the sky that originally covered the sky had already disappeared. Then, there was an earth-shattering sound, as if a mountain had fallen from the sky. Even standing here, they could feel the trembling of the ground. Everyone's stiff and lifeless eyes slowly shifted to the ground. Then, the entire merchant group fell into complete silence. This was because there really was a mountain on the ground. That was the corpse of the sunless eagle. A gust of wind blew, and the smell of blood filled the air. As if they didn't know what kind of appalling thing they had done, the group in front paused for a moment, and then continued on their way. The silent merchant group came to the side of the mountain-like corpse of the sunless eagle. Looking at its torn chest, everyone's eyes became more and more awed. Such a powerful demon beast was directly killed without the slightest resistance. And the most terrifying thing was that throughout the whole process, they didn't feel the slightest fluctuation of power. 3 days later, the demon wolves roared again and again, madly besieging their chosen prey. Save us! Save us! A group of demons looked at the carriage and horse that were quietly coming from afar with ecstasy on their faces. Regardless of the cost, they tore open a gap in the demon wolves' encirclement and rushed towards the carriage with all their might. Monarch Schwanza, who was driving the carriage, slightly raised his head to look. Muffled sounds rang out one after another as heads flew into the sky. The headless corpse continued to rush forward, blood spurting out for a long distance before it fell to the ground with a thud. A wolf howled in horror. A giant white wolf glanced at the carriage from afar and turned to run without hesitation. In the blink of an eye, the entire wolf pack disappeared without a trace. The carriage continued to move forward. The faces of the merchant group turned pale as they looked at the head that was covered with scars not far away. It was the head of the first merchant group to leave the merchant group. They didn't stop, and no one even touched the things on these corpses because they were the spoils of war of the previous team. They didn't need them, but they weren't qualified to occupy them. Chapter 11:56. The cold wind was bone-chilling. It carried with it the fishy smell of seawater, filling their noses and mouths. Monarch Schwanza looked into the distance at the endless darkness. A strange light flashed in his eyes before he immediately composed himself. He jumped off the carriage. There was a series of cracking sounds. On the surface of his raincoat, the layer of ice that had condensed over it shattered and fell to the ground. "We've arrived." Monarch Schwanza's voice was calm. After several breaths of time, the carriage door opened and Shinyu smiled and nodded. "I've troubled you along the way." His complexion was still a bit pale, but his eyes were incomparably bright. When he looked at them, they even gave off a dazzling feeling. Monarch Schwanza looked at him without expression. "You've passed through the endless abyss and arrived at the edge of the cold sea. Now, can you tell me your goal?" Shinyu stepped down from the carriage. He glanced at the shivering and pale Mianya and waved his hand, indicating for her to return. Then he said, "I'm sorry, there are some things that this junior still hasn't confirmed, so I really don't know what to say." Of course, this was a lie. Monarch Schwanza frowned, but didn't say anything. Since Chin, you didn't want to say it, there was nothing he could do. Old Fox dismounted from his horse. He walked over and respectfully bowed. "Sir, shall we go in?" Chinya looked up at the pitch-black sea in the distance. He smiled and nodded. "Of course. The reason we've traveled such a long way is to come here." He took the lead and walked towards the seashore. This city could be called Seaside City, located in the deepest depths of the abyss. The entire city was constructed from a kind of rough black stone that was covered with traces of weathering and corrosion. If one didn't look carefully from afar, it would be hard to distinguish it from the cold sea. The city stood tall in the cold wind, silent like a great beast. Although it seemed quiet, it could actually open its bloody maw at any moment. Fierce, cruel, bloody. These were probably the labels that people subconsciously thought of when they first saw this city. There were people in the city, This wasn't nonsense, but a reminder that those that could survive in this city were absolutely ruthless characters. To them, scars were like hair on their bodies. Everyone in front of them looked at them as if they were knives. Compared to them, Chinyu, who wore clean and luxurious black robes and calmly walked through the black icicles with an incredibly beautiful maid following behind him, simply looked out of place. Oh, Myanya had obediently returned to the carriage, wrapped herself up in a thick layer of clothing, and walked down again. Although she was bloated, just her small face and watery eyes were enough to attract the attention of others. Almost all the eyes of the demon clan men in front of her fell on her body. They stuck out their tongues and licked the corners of their lips, their eyes filled with passion and greed. There were a few exceptions. Their gazes fell on Chinyu. Compared to Myanya, their gazes weren't any worse. Of course, this was just an example, so there was no need to elaborate on this aspect. Black City was really too cold, so cold that it was impossible for those delicate women to survive, and women who were qualified to live were often more terrifying than men. So in this damn place, women were in high demand and also the most profitable business for those caravans that risked their lives. After an ordinary female slave entered Black City, they could earn over 100 times the profit. Unfortunately, these female slaves didn't live long. They could only rely on the caravans to sell them in batches. And Myanya, no matter how one looked at it, couldn't be compared to those female slaves. But no one spoke, and no one approached to do anything, even though the burning gazes of those fierce demon clan men nearly melted her. They watched as Chinyu and his group quietly entered Black City, finally vanishing from sight. They stopped outside the city in a caravan group, rubbing their hands together as they breathed out cold air. They spat out a mouthful of saliva in disappointment, but it instantly froze and fell to the ground. A bunch of cowards! They were fierce to us, but now they don't even have the guts. Cowards! They fiercely cursed, but they couldn't help but admit that these bastards were smart enough to not cause any trouble. They originally thought that these villains would suffer a bit, so that they would be a bit more restrained in the following transactions. A caravan leader bitterly smiled. Those that can survive in Black City definitely aren't stupid. Haven't we all guessed it already? He turned and looked at his subordinates following close behind him, a fervent look in his eyes. Everyone, it's time for us to enter the city. Let's go. There are many people that came this time, so let's say in advance that everything will be according to the previous agreement. No one can violate the rules. That's right, we borrowed the light of others to smoothly arrive at Black City. We can't waste it. We have to earn a great deal of good luck this time. The arrival of a caravan far larger than usual injected a brief liveliness into the cold and lonely Black City. The entire city came alive with it. Bright lanterns were lit up everywhere in the city. Every place where the lanterns were lit represented the station of a caravan. They had all sorts of materials that were scarce in Black City. As long as one could afford it, they could obtain everything they wanted. As for female slaves, they were the most expensive of them all. Myanya stood in front of a window. Not too far away, her eyes fell on a low courtyard that was brightly lit. Even though she was far away, she could still hear the horrifying laughter and the pitiful screams of women. She crossed her arms, her body shivering. She subconsciously turned to look at Chinyu, who was calmly drinking tea at a table. Only then did she calm down a little. Close the window. The wind is too strong. Chinyu lightly said, his expression calm. Every place had its own rules, and everyone had their own destiny. It was impossible for everyone to interfere. Even if they weren't afraid of trouble, they would still tire themselves to death. Myanya closed the window and walked back. She poured a cup for Chinyu. In this cold environment, the steam from the cup was particularly clear. Even the best inn in Black City and the best room couldn't completely isolate the cold from the outside world. This cold came from the cold sea outside the city. It was also the city's most terrifying killer. Over the countless years, it had swallowed countless lives. For instance, the screams of the female slaves were likely to end up like this. Myanya rubbed her stiff fingers together. It was unknown what she was thinking, but a bit of worry crossed her face. Chinyu said, There is no need to worry. You should know that I won't let anything happen to you." He lifted a hand and pointed at the bed. In this icy cold room, this was the only place that emitted warmth. It was also the greatest manifestation of this extremely expensive room's value. After all, to maintain such a warm bed in Black City, even if it wasn't too large, the costs were still astoundingly great. "Go and sleep. You've worked hard on this trip." Mianya obediently nodded. She took off her thick outer clothes, revealing her alluring figure. She drilled into the bed, only her head poking out. She looked at Yu and hesitated for a moment. Then she said, "Sir, your body hasn't fully recovered yet. How about we rest on the bed together?" Yu waved his hand. "No need." Without further explanation, Mianya's eyes revealed a trace of disappointment. The room fell silent. Holding the teacup, Yu could feel the warmth rapidly dissipating between his fingers. He tapped his fingers. Old Fox should have found the person. Where there was a sea, there would naturally be a pier. Black City was no exception. Or it would be more accurate to say that the fundamental reason for the existence of this city was this pier. Black City existed because of the cold sea, and the pier was the only place where one could enter and leave the cold sea. Old Fox was here, and the shadowless demon was hidden in the shadows beneath his feet. The two of them possessed strength that far surpassed anything Shiri could compare with. But as they stood in the bone-chilling cold of the pier, they still felt extremely cold. "My family, sir, wishes to go out to sea. May I ask if there are any large ships that are planning to set sail?" Old Fox smiled and cupped his hands together, his expression harmless. But this appearance of his didn't cause the other party to look at him warmly. Instead, the other party's icy cold eyes wandered back and forth over him. "What is your goal in going out to sea?" Old Fox honestly said, "How could servants like us possibly know the master's will? If you don't say it, then you won't be able to board the ship." The man across from him bared his pitch-black chest. Even though the temperature was terrifyingly low, it didn't seem to harm him at all. On the contrary, it was like a raging flame was burning within his body, causing the crisscrossing scars on his body to burn red and exude a thick, killing intent. His cold eyes stared at Old Fox like a man-eating wolf. Old Fox frowned. "Is there no other way?" The bare-chested man frowned slightly, and the chill in the air suddenly became even heavier. At this time, a woman walked over and whispered something into his ear. The man's eyebrows furrowed even tighter. The woman stood up and drew back. Old Fox subconsciously glanced at her. This was the first woman he had seen since entering Black City. Her skin was rough and dark. This was the work of the sea breeze and the cold. But she was unexpectedly beautiful. In addition to her strong and healthy body and icy cold eyes, she gave off a wild sense of beauty. If this were any other place, this woman would have been able to arouse the desire of many men to conquer her. But this was Black City by the cold sea. The moment Old Fox's eyes fell on her, the woman seemed to sense it. She turned her head and their eyes met. Old Fox's body stiffened, but he revealed a smile. The woman turned and left. Old Fox sighed inwardly. He thought that this place was far too dangerous. He didn't think he was weak, but with just a glance, he actually felt an intense threat from this woman. In terms of strength, he was definitely stronger. But if it was a life or death battle, he would be the one to die. "You can leave. Let your young master think clearly about his purpose in entering the cold sea, and then come find me." The man turned and left. He paused for a moment and then turned back. "My name is Tongue Hai." Old Fox wanted to say something, but he shut up the next moment. After cupping his hands, he turned and left. Only when he left the pier did he let out a long breath. His face paled, and there was a hint of shock in his eyes. What a terrifying aura. That Tongue Hai was definitely one of the top powerhouses in Black City. The feeling he gave Old Fox was that even Hei Tiangang was weaker than him. Shadowless Demon's gloomy voice came from the shadow. "If we can't complete young master's request, what should we do?" Old Fox bitterly smiled. "We can only go back and tell the truth. It is a bit shameful, but young master should be able to understand. It is better than us being killed." Just now, he really felt a thick, killing intent that was almost condensed into a substance. It was as if he said one more word, he would be met with a horrifying attack. Because of this, he left the pier in a hurry without saying a word. Shadowless Demon sighed. We can only do this. The two of them returned without accomplishing anything. They stood awkwardly in front of him. Chinyu rubbed his chin and smiled. It's fine. As long as you show your faces and pass on the message, it's fine. After a pause, a sharp light flashed in his eyes. They followed behind us all the way and saved many people from dying. It's about time they did something. Chapter 11:57. The people sitting in this room were undoubtedly the most popular ones in Black Castle. As the leaders of the various caravans, they naturally had this kind of status before the goods in their hands were completely exchanged. For the time being, they temporarily put aside the transactions that could bring in huge profits every minute because they weren't worried about the sales of their goods. Of course, the most important thing was that the person they were about to discuss had the qualifications to make them sacrifice for him. Everyone is here. Everyone's time is precious, so I won't be long-winded and will get straight to the point. The person in charge of this gathering glanced around. Young Master Qin's people went to the docks and were rejected by Tung Hai. I think we should do something. As soon as his voice fell, another caravan leader smiled bitterly. Tung Hai is one of the hardest bones to bite in Black Castle. Even if we speak, we might not be able to please him. That's right, Tung Hai is not easy to deal with. Unless young Master Qin gives a clear answer, it will be very difficult to change his decision. He groaned incessantly. The host of the gathering sneered, "Don't talk nonsense. Since you're here today, you should already know why." His pupils constricted, revealing a look of fear. Don't forget what happened to Scarface and the others. The room instantly fell silent. The caravan leaders all had grave expressions on their faces. This was indeed something they had no choice but to consider. Strictly speaking, the reason they were able to safely arrive at Black City was because they had taken advantage of Qin Yu's group. Now that he was a coward, who knew if he would flip out? No one was willing to bear the consequences of young Master Qin losing his temper. The speaker of the gathering saw that everyone recognized the seriousness of the matter, and his tone softened a little. Returning a favor and helping young Master Qin achieve his wish is what we should do. You. And I almost didn't lose anything on this trip to Black City, and the profit we can earn is at least several times higher than expected. No matter how tough Tung Hai is, he isn't alone. He has so many subordinates under him. We have to think about them. Sigh, that's the only way. If no one has any objections, let's discuss the rules. I'll just take it as an advance investment. Perhaps because of this, I'll be able to leave a good impression in front of young Master Qin. Who knows, there might even be other gains. His words made everyone's eyes light up. The discussion that followed was rather smooth. At most, it was about the convenience of the loss of benefits. After a few more arguments, it was settled. On this day, the three elected leaders of the caravan entered the dock outside Black City. As for the specifics of what was said, only Tung Hai and the three caravans knew. Soon, a woman arrived at the inn where Qin Yu and the others were staying. The first leader has agreed for you to board the ship. We will weigh anchor in 3 days. Don't miss the time. Cold was about to leave when her gaze landed on my Anya. There was a hint of hesitation in her gaze. Qin Yu glanced at me Anya. Me Anya walked forward and smiled. What's the matter, big sister? If you need any help, just let me know. You guys talk. Qin Yu turned around and left. An hour later, the woman from the pier left the inn. Compared to when she arrived, her complexion was much more relaxed. She glanced at Qin Yu, who was sitting in the cold living room, quietly drinking tea. She thought for a moment and said, "When we enter the frigid sea this time, the boss has received some business. We might have to go much deeper, so you should all prepare ahead of time." She didn't stay any longer. She turned and left. As for Tung Hai entering the frigid sea ahead of time, it wasn't a secret to begin with. The woman didn't worry that Qin Yu and the others would have any crooked thoughts. Otherwise, humph, That would be the same as seeking their own death. Go deep into the frigid sea? Chinyu revealed a smile. That couldn't be any better. He was originally thinking about how to make the ship sail for several more days. After the woman left, everyone in the caravan sent an invitation to Chinyu, inviting him to attend a banquet and so on. Without surprise, the invitation was rejected by Chinyu. But everyone in the caravan had already expected this, so they didn't care at all. They had already expressed their attitude in front of Sir Chin. That was enough. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. At the dock outside Black City, a large ship quietly floated on the sea. There was no need to describe it. Just the word large was enough to show its essence. It was truly large, like a small island. At the bow and stern of the ship, there were thick and sharp horns that were twisted and broken. The surface of the ship was a deep and dark reddish-brown color. Just looking at it made one feel a chill run down their spine. Tinghai stood on the deck. He looked at Chinyu, paused for a moment, and then shifted his gaze to Monarch Xuanzi, who was silently standing behind him. After several breaths of time, his pupils shrank. He looked at Chinyu several more times, lifted an arm, and shouted out, "Board the ship." The ship was large, not only because the winds and waves of the frigid sea were greater, but also because there were far, far too many people that needed to board the ship. Although there was a dock outside of Black City, the truth was that there weren't many ships that sailed throughout the year. To the desperados of Black City, this was a grand event that they couldn't miss. They endured the bitter cold and lived in this place. Of course, this wasn't because they had masochistic tendencies. The frigid sea was terrifying, but to these desperados, it also contained endless possibilities. Chinyu led the way. Mianya stuck close to him. The burning hot and greedy eyes all around her caused her face to pale. Monarch Xuanzi fell behind the two of them. Old Fox waved his hand. "Young master, be careful." He had been asked to stay in Black City. Although he didn't know why he stayed in Black City, Old Fox didn't question him. It was just that in his mind, he subconsciously thought back to the iron box that the young master had given him. It had completely sealed away all auras. Old Fox didn't know what was inside, but he could feel a dignified look in a young master's eyes. This was probably the reason he stayed in Black City. As long as he lived, he absolutely wouldn't let anyone touch this iron box. Shadowless Demon was still hidden in Old Fox's shadow. He watched Chinyu's group board the ship, a bit of depression in his eyes. That little girl Mianya, why was she able to follow the young master? The one who should be boarding the ship the most should be him. After all, on this ship where the situation was complex and unclear, he was an expert at hiding his aura and scouting for information. He was indispensable, but Chinyu clearly didn't explain anything. He only told him to listen to Old Fox's arrangements. This left Shadowless Demon even more depressed. He looked at Monarch Xuanzi's back with a bit of bitterness in his eyes. If it weren't for this old ghost, he wouldn't have missed the chance to get closer to the young master. He wouldn't have been robbed by Old Fox and Hei Tiangang, and he would have fallen to his current unvalued status. As Monarch Xuanzi boarded the ship, his lips twitched. He thought that the people around Qin, you were too insolent. Did they really think that he, a dignified, true king, couldn't sense anything? Humph humph, especially Shadowless Demon. If it weren't for you, a dignified, true king like me wouldn't have fallen into the hands of others. I'll give you one more point. When I have a chance in the future, I'll carefully settle this with you. Monarch Xuanzi sneered inwardly. He looked up at Tinghai, who was standing at the bow of the ship. Their eyes met for a moment before he lowered his head. Although the surrounding men looked at Mianya as if they wanted to skin her alive, no one dared to approach. This group of people in front of him had entered Black City without any accidents. This was a demonstration of their strength. Not to mention, there was some news from the merchant group that made the desperados of Black City secretly afraid. Desperados were people who didn't fear death for the sake of their own benefits. But it was just a woman. No matter how thirsty they were, they wouldn't throw their lives away for her. The woman who delivered the letter to the inn was also the only woman in the group of villains under Tinghai. She came in front of Chinyu and looked at the pale Mianya. She couldn't help but frown, and her expression towards Chinyu became even colder. "Follow me." As she spoke, She grabbed Mianya and walked forward first. From all directions, the heated gazes that gathered on them quickly disappeared. No one dared to reveal any other emotions. The woman sneered and said to Mianya, "Men are cheap. If you beat them up, they won't dare to have any other thoughts." Mianya was embarrassed. Chinyu rubbed his nose. He looked at the woman's strong back and thought that her words were a bit innuendo. As if sensing Chinyu's gaze, the woman turned around and coldly looked at him. If a man can't even protect his own woman, then he might as well kill himself. Her words were very extreme. It made one feel like there was some hidden story behind them. Humph! The woman turned her head and coldly led the way. Chinyu helplessly smiled and waved his hand at Mianya, indicating that it was fine. It was most likely because of Mianya that Chinyu's group of 3 had very good accommodations arranged on the ship. The view was good, and they didn't feel stuffy. Of course, there was still the cold. There were at least several thousand desperados on the ship. How could there be enough supplies to keep warm? If he couldn't even withstand this chill, then so be it. In any case, it was only a matter of time before he died. Set sail. At the bow and stern of the ship, thick and rusty chains began to move. With a loud crashing sound, a giant anchor was pulled out from the sea. A low and deep hum came from within the ship. Chinyu's eyes flashed, because at this moment he seemed to hear a low roar. This ship, could it be that it was alive? He glanced at Monarch Xuanji. This old fellow was expressionless and didn't reveal any strange emotions. It was impossible to guess what he was thinking. Walala! The ship broke through the waves. In the pitch-black seawater, it drew a white line as it slowly sailed into the depths of the endless cold sea. Woo, woo, woo. The low and deep sound of a horn echoed out from Black City. This was a necessary step every time a ship set sail. It was a prayer to the cold sea, praying that it would be merciful and not cause too much slaughter. But death was inevitable. This was the price and punishment that the demons had to bear for entering the cold sea. Black City was cold, but the cold sea was even colder. As the ship sailed across the sea, it naturally displayed this chill to the fullest. From the moment Mianya boarded the ship, she had burrowed into her blankets. Even though only her head was exposed, she was still shivering from the cold. Her teeth constantly chattered. In the narrow cabin, they emitted small ka-ka-ka sounds. This was a bit shameful. A faint blush appeared on Mianya's pale face, but this wasn't something she could control. Chinyu looked away from the sea and the sky and turned to look at her. Although her cultivation wasn't weak, the cold of the cold sea was far too terrifying. Moreover, they hadn't even entered the depths of the cold sea yet. If this continued, Mianya wouldn't be able to withstand it. Chinyu looked at the door and hesitated. Mianya guessed his thoughts and shook her head. "Sir, I'm not cold. There's no need to trouble Senior." She wasn't too clear on Monarch Xuanji's identity. No one explained it to her, and she was smart enough not to ask. But this didn't mean that Mianya didn't know just how strong and terrifying Monarch Xuanji was. In front of Monarch Xuanji, even someone as strong as Ebony Sky, Old Fox, and Shadowless Demon were as obedient as little kittens, always respectful. She certainly didn't dare to approach. Chinyu sighed inwardly. He walked over to the bed and sat down. "Stay closer to me." He looked up and continued to look outside the window. The sky and sea were overcast, almost turning black. His mind was immersed in this scene, and he suddenly lost track of time. After an unknown period of time, Chinyu suddenly became aware of something. He looked down at Mianya, who was tightly hugging him, nearly burrowing into his chest. Chinyu's lips twitched. He shook his head and closed his eyes. During this long journey, he had nearly recovered from the weakness in his body, but he still felt that he lacked energy. Chinyu had already experienced this before. An appropriate amount of rest was much more efficient than stubbornly persisting. On the second day after the ship entered the cold sea, the chill rose once more. The first wave of attacks from the sea finally erupted. It was a bonefish with pitch-black scales all over its body. The reason why it was called a bonefish was because its body was covered with a layer of white bone armor. Its entire body was extremely thin and withered, as if its head was really made up of these pale white bones. The bonefishes constantly tore through the sea surface and leapt into the air. Their speed was astonishing. They were like sharp arrows that pierced through the air, stabbing towards everyone. Some unlucky fellows had their bodies torn apart. They cried out miserably as they fell into the sea. Blood flashed as they were eaten up in the blink of an eye. Of course, even more bonefishes were killed. The eyes of the desperados shined. They didn't care about the wounds on their bodies at all. After crushing the bonefishes, they placed them into their storage treasures. Some of the more impatient ones immediately stuffed the bonefishes into their mouths, chewing on them with loud crunching sounds. Traces of blood splashed out as they laughed happily. The bonefishes' attacks continued for a full hour. After crossing an invisible line, they seemed to have exceeded their hunting range. After several breaths of time, they vanished from sight. The desperados fell to the ground one after another, gasping for breath. But their faces were filled with excitement. Since they hadn't died, they had profited greatly. This was certainly something to be happy about. Some people began to clean up the battlefield and repair the small marks that appeared on the surface of the ship. In the cold sea, this ship was everyone's hope of survival. Now, a small crack might lead to an incomparably terrifying ending. They absolutely couldn't afford to be careless. After the battle, the casualties of the desperados numbered around 100. This wasn't a high ratio. Tung Hai relaxed a little. Although they had gone out to sea ahead of schedule, the cold sea's performance was still normal. There weren't too many changes. He swept his eyes around. In a quiet cabin, when everyone rushed out to hunt the bonefishes, that cabin had remained quiet from start to finish. Tung Hai subconsciously furrowed his eyebrows. This was because he knew that this silence only meant that they had an even greater goal. Just why did they come here? If there were subordinates familiar with Tung Hai here, they would discover that the great boss's eyes weren't as simple as they seemed. The skies became darker, causing the seawater to become even darker. Of course, the relationship between the two sides could also be reversed. Mian had already adapted to hugging Qin for warmth. She didn't blush so often, but rather seemed to enjoy it. Of course, the truth was that she had to maintain a state of being close to Qin at all times. Otherwise, the terrifying cold outside would soon turn her into a giant block of ice. This was because it had already been 7 days since the great ship went out to sea. From here, they could be considered to have truly entered the depths of the cold sea. Chapter 1158. Entering the depths of the cold sea meant that the true dangers had just begun to arrive. The first wave came from a giant deep-sea octopus. Its entire body was deep blue, like a beautiful and dazzling ice crystal. But while it was beautiful, it also represented absolute terror. Its tentacles were over 100,000 feet long, and they tightly wrapped around the ship. One could clearly hear the ship groaning in their ears. The suckers at the bottom of the tentacles erupted with a terrifying, swallowing strength. Even though the desperados on the ship were fierce and fierce, in front of it they were as fragile as an egg with its shell peeled off, leaving behind only a thin layer of translucent membrane. Qin Yu personally witnessed a Black City desperado being sucked in by the suckers. In the blink of an eye, his entire body withered away. His flesh and blood mixed with his bones were cleanly swallowed, leaving behind only a thin layer of paper-thin skin that floated down to the ground. This battle lasted for an entire day and night. After the deep-sea octopus ate and drank its fill, it finally let go of the damaged ship and vanished into the pitch-black deep sea. The sky was black, and the sea was also black. Only the lights on the ship released a bleak light. After this battle, the atmosphere on the ship began to change. Some people thought that they had sailed far enough, and it was time to go back. But this proposal was directly rejected by Tung Hai. The reason was that he hadn't finished his business yet. This reason was sufficient. Of course, the most important reason was that Tung Hai was a member of this ship, and he was strong enough. So after a short period of repairs, the ship continued to sail deep into the sea. And at this time, there were less than 3,000 desperados that boarded the ship from Black City. Around a quarter of them had died. First leader, the deep-sea blue seal, should not have appeared here. I'm afraid we encountered some changes in the sea by heading out early this time. In the ship's hold, those who had the qualifications to sit were all people with status on the ship. Including Tung Hai, there were only 6 people. One of them was that woman who didn't like Chinyu. Hearing this, everyone frowned. A trace of fear appeared in the depths of their cold eyes. No one knew why the sea changed, but every time it appeared, it was when the cold sea was at its most terrifying. This was because the rules that the people of Black City had used countless lives to figure out were no longer effective. Moreover, some terrifying life forms hidden in the depths of the cold sea would appear on the surface and attack them. This was the most fatal factor of danger. For example, this deep-sea blue octopus. They weren't the only ones with knowledge. Sea transformation wasn't a secret in Black City. That was why there were voices asking to stop and return to Black City in advance. The wild woman had an even wilder name, Mountain Cat. Her eyes were cold. We can still suppress the current situation, but if there are more accidents, it will be very troublesome. Voices within a small area could be suppressed, but once it went out of control, even if they were the masters of the ship, they would have to obey the will of the majority. Otherwise, did they really think that the desperados in Black City wouldn't do things like killing people and seizing ships? Similar things had happened before. Of course, no one dared to have this idea easily. Those who could control a large ship and had the qualifications to go out to sea were the top characters in Black City. Even if such a character could be killed, it would require countless lives to be forcefully piled up. As mentioned before, desperados were also afraid of death. Not to mention, if Tung Hai and the others died, the ship would be mostly destroyed. Did he really think that he didn't have any countermeasures or trump cards? But for things like accidents, if there was a first, there would often be a second. Chinyu stood in front of the cabin window. He looked at the giant beast blocking the way and frowned. There's going to be trouble. Mianya leaned against him, her body shivering in fear. Even though they were far away, the aura of the giant beast still caused a powerful suppression on her. This was a suppression on the level of bloodline. This was the first time Chinyu saw the might of the ship. So it wasn't just a tool for navigating the cold sea, but also a powerful moving fortress. The bow and stern of the ship were terrifying killing machines. Every time they collided with the giant beast, large wounds would be torn open on its body and blood would splash out. Of course, the so-called large wounds were only seen from the perspective of the abyssal demons. In truth, this giant beast was astonishingly large, and its wounds weren't small, but they weren't serious injuries either. 2 days later, the ship escaped the attack of this unknown giant beast and returned to tranquility once more. The black seawater was like a huge mirror. Strangely, there were no ripples at all. The ship stopped on the sea. It had been severely damaged and had no choice but to stop and repair itself. As for the desperados on the ship, there were only around 2,000 of them left. Several hundred people had died in the battle with the giant beast in these 2 days. Those that survived certainly had harvests. The blood that the giant beast threw out, the scales and flesh that fell off, were all precious treasures to them. But no matter how tempting these harvests were, they needed to be alive in order to have any meaning. Otherwise, everything they obtained now would be equal to nothing. The atmosphere on the ship became oppressive. The voices against continuing to sail became increasingly intense. Nearly half of the desperados requested to return. Although it hadn't been made clear yet, news of the sea transformation had already begun to spread in private, causing fear to appear on the faces of countless people. A meeting was held in the cabin once more. But this time, there were only 5 people attending. Those that were absent had fallen into the cold sea during the battle, and no one could save them. They could only watch helplessly as they sank to the seabed. The atmosphere became even more oppressive. A business that could move Tung Hai's heart and disrupt his previous plans to sail ahead of time was certainly a massive business. The profits after this were enough for them to enjoy for several years. Thus, everyone unanimously agreed to enter the cold sea ahead of time. But the sea transformation really happened. Tung Hai could feel the change in the mentality of his subordinates. He could understand it, so he didn't say much. He glanced at them and said lightly, "Wait a moment." After he finished speaking, he stood up and left the cabin. He stood behind the railing. The view here was very good, and he could see the entire situation on the ship. Of course, with such a good view, it also meant that all eyes from all directions could smoothly fall on him. Tung Hai could feel the anxiety and uneasiness in their eyes, which concealed a trace of bloodthirst, but his expression remained calm. To be able to become the owner of a ship, the storms he had experienced in his life were enough to help him temper an incomparably strong will. Moreover, at this moment, his attention did not fall on these gazes that were gathered from all directions. Tung Hai had always been looking in the same direction, but to his disappointment, he didn't get any response. If that's the case, Tung Hai took a deep breath, turned around, and entered the cabin. He said expressionlessly, "Continue sailing." In the cabin, the expressions of the four people, including Lynx, changed slightly, but they didn't say anything. This was the prestige that Tung Hai had built up over the years with his strength and facts. After the repairs were completed, the ship continued to move forward. The first wave of opposition appeared, but it was quickly suppressed. The method was very cruel. Anyone who tried to cause trouble was directly beheaded, and blood dyed the deck red. The clamoring to return to the ship disappeared, but Tung Hai and the others knew that the real danger was often in silence. Reality proved that their consciousness was not wrong. On the incomparably dark ship, there was a wave of riots. Tung Hai survived, but one of his most trusted subordinates was personally beheaded by him. Therefore, in the cabin, there were only 4 people who participated in the meeting. Tung Hai's eyes were cold. "Continue to move forward. If anyone objects, you can continue to try to kill me." Lynx found him, but he didn't give any explanation. Even though she was the only woman by his side, Tung Hai's attitude towards her was not excessive at all. The black sky, the black sea, and the scarred ship moved forward in loneliness. The extremely cold aura gradually covered the surface of the ship with a thick layer of ice, which was as black as the sea. It covered everything. So, those who lived on the ship were also living on the ice. But what people couldn't understand was, with such extreme cold, why hadn't the cold sea below frozen over? Myanya had fallen unconscious. Even with Qin Yu's warmth, it wasn't enough to help her completely avoid the invasion of the cold. Luckily, there was still King Xuanzi. The strength of a true abyssal king wasn't just for show. The terrifyingly low temperature of the cold sea didn't seem to affect him at all. It was unknown what fruit he fed Myanya, but it was bright red all over. After eating it, Myanya fell into a deep slumber, and her pale face began to flush with blood. This fruit can temporarily help her resist the invasion of the cold, but it can only last for 3 days. King Xuanzi glanced at Qin Yu. "Although I still have some with me, the deeper we go into the cold sea, the stronger the cold will become, and the weaker the fruit's effects will be." This was a reminder to Qin Yu that if he continued, there was a chance she would die. Qin Yu nodded. He suddenly said, "Senior seems to be very familiar with the cold sea." King Xuanzi lightly said, "The true abyssal king is impervious to all evil. This is an ability bestowed upon them by the will of the abyss. You will understand in the future." To put it more bluntly, if one didn't understand the abilities of a true abyssal king, then one shouldn't speak nonsense. This old thing, no matter how calm he appeared on the surface, his heart was already filled with impatience. And this impatience proved that Qin Yu's words just now seemed to have touched upon something. Could it be that the netherworld king bloodline that had disappeared into the abyss and disappeared without a trace was actually hidden in the cold sea? King Xuanzi didn't speak, but he felt that Qin Yu's eyes were incomparably loathsome. This brat's nose was quite sharp. In all fairness, he hadn't exposed anything, but Qin Yu had still managed to discover a flaw. This caused him to feel a bit of regret. He hadn't carefully considered the fruit he fed Myanya. He should have just watched her freeze to death. That's right. Qin Yu's guess was correct. The Netherworld King bloodline was hidden in the deepest part of the abyss, the extremely terrifying Cold Sea. This was because only this place could barely suppress the uncontrollable power of fire within the Netherworld King bloodline's inherited bloodline. Qin Yu glanced at King Xuance's ugly complexion. He smiled and said, "If so, then what Ting Hai saw last time was senior." He rubbed his chin. With the strength of the Netherworld King bloodline, it should be easy to control several ships that enter and leave the Cold Sea. Senior, don't you think so? King Xuanze was expressionless. He glanced at Qin Yu and then turned to walk away. He sat back down in a corner and closed his eyes. However, his attitude in itself indicated a great deal. A sharp light flashed in Qin Yu's eyes. The corners of his lips curved up in a smile before he immediately composed himself. He didn't fear the Netherworld King bloodline, even if its strength was terrifying, because King Xuanze himself was his protective shield. This old fellow definitely didn't want something as shameful as him to be discovered. Thus, the one who didn't want to encounter them was actually King Xuanze. However, this old fellow's plans were likely to fail. Qin Yu turned to look at Mianya, and then at the ship that was covered in black ice. He let out a light breath. He had underestimated the strength of the Cold Sea. If it weren't for the Netherworld King bloodline being here, things would have been much more troublesome. Senior, I'll have to trouble you to contact your family. King Xuanze opened his eyes. As he looked at the smiling Qin Yu, he wished he could punch him and smash him to smithereens. Chapter 1159. Tung Hai panicked. As mentioned before, desperados were afraid of death. Even their leader, Shi Xingshan, was no exception. Of course, he knew that he was walking on a tightened steel wire. Even if he was skilled and wouldn't fall, what if the steel wire broke? What awaited him was no different. He would be crushed into pieces. Now, Tung Hai slept with one eye open. He didn't even eat or drink. As long as he could persist, he would hold his breath. There was no other way. He didn't know who wanted to kill him, and he didn't know what methods they would use. No one could be trusted. Even Lynx, who climbed into his bed, was alienated and guarded against. Because the more one experienced the tempering of life and death, the more one understood that nothing was impossible under the shadow of the great terror of life and death. If he had a choice, Tung Hai would have ordered the ship to return. Didn't he know how terrifying the sea was? So what if it was a big business? Without his life, no matter how much he paid, it was meaningless. But he couldn't, because King Xuanze was on the ship. When they boarded the ship, Tung Hai was able to determine his identity. However, King Xuanze didn't reveal his identity, so he could only remain silent. On the surface, everyone thought that he was the person with the highest authority on the ship. But in fact, with the appearance of King Xuanze, he had become a puppet. Without King Xuanze's order, he didn't dare to announce the return. Creak! The cabin door was pushed open. Layers of ice rubbed against each other, emitting harsh sounds. Mountain Cat walked in with a slightly pale face. Even she couldn't withstand the chill in this place. Therefore, she was aware of the living conditions of the others on the ship. If they continued to move deeper into the Cold Sea, everyone would die here. Since death was inevitable, they wouldn't choose such a humiliating death. The volcano could erupt at any moment. Even if Tung Hai was the strongest person on the ship, he would still be burned to ashes. Tung Hai, no matter what you think, we must return unless you want to drag everyone down with you. Tung Hai looked at her, his eyes cold. You don't understand. I don't understand, but this isn't your style. If there is something, you can tell me. Perhaps I can help you. Link stared into his eyes. Tung Hai remained expressionless as he replied, No. His voice stopped abruptly. He abruptly got up and quickly walked out of the cabin to the observation deck. He gripped the railing tightly with both hands, and with a cracking sound, the layer of ice was crushed and fell. Mountain Cat quickly caught up. What's the matter? Tung Hai took a deep breath and withdrew his gaze. Give the order. Change the course and head towards the north-southeast. After some hesitation, he glanced at Mountain Cat and said in a gentler tone, "Get ready. We're about to return." Finally, King Schwanz's order came. The atmosphere on the ship eased slightly. Everyone knew that Tung Hai had decided to return. Although many people had died, they were still alive, and every one of them had obtained a harvest that far exceeded their expectations. After all, danger and reward in the frigid sea had always been proportional. In fact, it was precisely because of this that the desperados from Black City could endure until now. After all, the way of thinking of a person with bare feet and a person with shoes would always be somewhat different. Seeing the ship change direction, King Schwanz's complexion darkened even more. He glared at Chinyu. "Next, I hope that you can remain quiet." Chinyu understood his meaning. He smiled and said, "Of course, this junior absolutely won't make things difficult for you." King Schwanza nearly exploded with anger. "You still dare to say you won't make things difficult for me? What the hell are you laughing at? You bastard, why don't you just die?" But regardless of whether King Schwanza was willing or not, after a day passed, it was finally time to meet again. A second ship appeared in the Black Sea. The bow of the ship was lit with red lanterns, making one feel a precious warmth. A few figures shrouded in black robes stood under the lanterns, silently watching the large ship that was sailing towards them. Chinyu picked up the unconscious Mayanya. "Senior, let's go." King Schwanz's face was expressionless. He pushed open the door and walked out first. This scene attracted many shocked gazes. This was because from the moment the ship went out to sea until now, the cabin Chinyu and the others were in had never been opened. No matter what sort of sea attacks they faced, they had always remained silent. Although it was said that if they didn't risk their lives, there were still some people who were dissatisfied with their behavior. This was especially true when they entered the deep sea and the thick aura of death shrouded them. Of course, the incomparably beautiful Mayanya was also an important reason. In normal circumstances, the desperados would still retain their rationality. But under the aura of death, it was unknown how long they could live. So how could they have any scruples? Some people tried to open the cabin door, and they succeeded. It could even be said that they walked in without any effort. Then, there was no then. All the desperados that entered the cabin disappeared inside, never to come out again. After several attempts, the cabin Chinyu and the others became a publicly recognized forbidden area. But now that it actually came out on their own initiative. Was it because of the ship that appeared on the sea? The cold sea was vast, but there was only a single Black City, and the number of ships that could go out to sea in Black City was also limited. At that moment, the shivering desperados finally realized that the ship in front of them was a very unfamiliar one. It was not as big as the ship they were standing on, but it clearly had more outstanding abilities. It stayed in the cold sea without any ice on its surface. There were 4 black-robed people at the bow of the ship. They were dressed very thinly, and 2 of them were obviously women. Deep in the cold sea, a strange ship that appeared out of nowhere, 2 men and 2 women in black robes. Even if one used their knees to think, they knew that this was not simple. Thus, there was silence on the ship. No one spoke. Tung Hai could feel the gazes of the people around him. He was the one who had given the order to turn. Now, they had met another ship in the depths of the cold sea. If they said it was a coincidence, that would be an insult to their intelligence. But Tung Hai could not respond to this. If the existence of the Netherworld royal bloodline was leaked, he would have to pay with his life. In the silence, King Schwanza walked in front, while Chinyu followed behind with Mayanya in his arms. Wherever they passed, the crowd automatically parted. Countless eyes were filled with confusion and awe. With a step, King Schwanza, Chinyu, and Mayanya soared into the air, flying towards another ship not too far away. But the moment they soared into the air, the surface of the sea split open and a shadow shot out, shooting straight towards Chinyu. The shadow was slender like an arrow, its speed inconceivably fast. And what was even more terrifying was that no matter if it broke through the sea or tore through the air, it didn't make the slightest sound at all. This black shadow was like a real shadow. But shadows could also kill people. This was something Chinyu was well aware of. Moreover, the one that tore through the sea wasn't Shadow. It was dangerous, but Chinyu didn't panic. Pa! With a soft sound, the black shadow flew out and landed on the big ship behind. It was actually a long, pitch-black fish with the shape of a ribbon. Its head was extremely small, only the size of an adult's knuckle. Its eyes were even smaller, about the size of a grain of rice. But even with this astonishing speed, the ribbon fish's two eyes were pierced through, and then its entire head was torn apart. A fatal strike. Arrow ribbon fish. The complexions of countless desperados changed, panic filling their eyes. There were countless terrifying demon beasts in the cold sea, and they had encountered many before. But in terms of individual lethality, the arrow ribbon fish in front of them was second to none. It was like a horrifying killer hidden in the cold black sea. Once it chose its prey, it would explosively attack. Beneath the terrifying attack of the arrow ribbon fish, even a demon commander-level powerhouse wouldn't have any room to resist. But now, this killer-level demon beast of the cold sea had been slaughtered in the blink of an eye. In fact, they only saw a shadow flash in front of them, and then its corpse flew towards them. They had no idea how it died. King Xuanzi lightly said, "This fish is for you. Consider it compensation." Tung Hai bowed. "Thank you, my lord." His eyes were full of excitement. Although the arrow ribbon fish wasn't his goal, and his great business had ultimately failed, this arrow ribbon fish could still be sold for an astonishing amount of wealth. King Xuanzi didn't speak further. His figure flickered, and he landed on the opposite ship. Chinyu was a step slower. The moment he landed on the deck, he could feel a long-lost warm aura. It was released from the ship, dispersing the cold in the air. But thinking about it, this was also normal. Since the Netherworld King bloodline was hidden in the cold sea, there had to be a way to resist the cold. His eyes swept over the four people on the other side. There were 2 men and 2 women covered in black robes. Their auras weren't weak at all. As Chinyu observed them, the 4 people's eyes also fell on him. But soon they looked away and bowed together. "Greetings, great uncle." King Xuanzi nodded. "Let's go." The red lantern-lit ship turned around and rapidly sailed deep into the cold sea. It soon turned into a red dot and vanished from sight. Tung Hai took a deep breath. He shouted, "Return." The ship arced through the air, heading in the direction of Black Castle. The lynx revealed a complex look. She wanted to say something, but hesitated. Tung Hai turned around. His eyes swept over her and then fell on the other trusted aides. Don't ask what you shouldn't know. Even if he asked, it would be a waste of time. The smarter he was, the more he guessed, the faster he would die. That would force him to kill. However, at this moment, Qin Yu's figure subconsciously appeared in Tung Hai's mind. What was the origin of this mysterious young man? What was his purpose in coming to the cold sea? Although Qin Yu had always been respectful towards King Xuanzi, Tung Hai didn't feel much fear from this respect. On the contrary, when King Xuanzi faced him, he felt his hands and feet bound. He took a deep breath and suppressed his thoughts. He didn't want to think about things he shouldn't think about. He had just reminded others. So how could he make such a mistake again? No matter who Qin Yu was or what he wanted to do, it had nothing to do with them. The only thing they needed to consider now was to safely return to Black Castle. The reason Tung Hai and the others were free was because someone had replaced their position. Facing King Xuanzi's question, Qin Yu didn't give a perfunctory answer. Instead, he gave a serious answer. "I want to enter the cold sea." But in fact, he was already in the cold sea. Moreover, it was an extremely deep and desolate region that very few people dared to enter. Even in this situation, he still gave such an answer. This caused a dignified expression to appear on King Xuanzi's face. Qin Yu's goal was clear. He wanted to go deeper into the cold sea. As for where exactly he wanted to go, he didn't give an answer. To put it simply, it could be understood as the deeper the better. It was said before that with the strength of a true abyssal king, they could freely wander through the abyss. Besides super strong existences on the same level, there weren't many dangers that could threaten their safety. But the cold sea was one of them, and it was the most terrifying kind. The Netherworld royal bloodline secluded itself in the cold sea. Out of all the races in the abyss, they should have the best understanding of just how terrifying it was. Many years ago, there was even a formidable true king with a Netherworld royal bloodline that insisted on exploring the depths of the cold sea. In the end, he never returned. The result could already be predicted. Taking a deep breath, King Xuanzi said, "Qinyu, I must remind you that the cold sea is far more terrifying than you can imagine. The terrifying cold in the depths is something that not even a true king can completely resist. Are you sure you want to continue deeper?" Qinyu bitterly smiled. He didn't have any masochistic tendencies at all. If he didn't have a choice, he wouldn't be willing to rush into the cold sea. But without accident, this incomparably terrifying cold sea that was located in the deepest depths of the abyss hid a channel to the vast Yang world. It was just that it was hidden deeper. With a dignified expression, Qinyu earnestly said, "I understand King Xuanzi's meaning, but this junior does have a reason." This was a direct response. King Xuanzi fell silent, but his heart was roaring. He should have known that following Qin you wouldn't be a good thing. Refuse. He couldn't refuse. Otherwise, he would be violating his oath. In other words, no matter where Qinyu went, he would have to brace himself and follow. If it were someone else, the truth was that King Xuanzi wouldn't be too worried. He was a dignified true king. So how could he not outlast a mere junior? Even if he went deep into the cold sea, before the great horror arrived, just that terrifying cold would be enough to kill anyone below the true king realm. At that time, he would naturally be able to escape. But now, the person beside King Xuanzi was Qinyu. It was Qinyu. Everything that happened in the nightmare ancestral land was still vivid in his mind. It was impossible for King Xuanzi to view him as a simple junior. Pessimistically, in terms of life-preserving abilities, even if he died, that bastard Qinyu would still be alive and kicking. This was truly a matter that left one helpless and indignant. King Xuanzi's face darkened. He flicked his sleeves and left. Qinyu expressed sympathy for him, but that was only sympathy. His determination to return to the vast Yang world wouldn't waver in the least. "Greetings, King Xuanzi." The four men and women took off their black robes, revealing their true appearances. They bowed respectfully. Without outsiders present, they certainly didn't dare to call him uncle. The Netherworld royal bloodline was tyrannical, but the more it was so, the more strict the hierarchy was. The dignity of a true abyssal king could not be offended. With a gloomy expression, King Xuanzi quickly left. The four Netherworld royal bloodline juniors stood up. Their faces were filled with apprehension and suspicion. They thought that King Xuanzi's mood was very bad. And on this ship, besides them, there were only two people left alive. One of them was still unconscious. In other words, the one who caused all of this could only be Qinyu. Just who was this boy? He angered King Xuanzi to such an extent, and yet he was still alive? Could it be that he was the direct descendant of some old monster? In the abyss, there were some terrifying existences that could be called taboos. They had lived for countless years, and their strength was so terrifying that even the Netherworld royal bloodline had to give them sufficient respect. Besides this, they couldn't think of any other explanation. As for King Xuanzi being controlled by others and having no choice but to swallow his anger, haha, what a joke. It wasn't funny at all, let alone thinking of this possibility. Even if this matter was made clear to these four Netherworld royal bloodline juniors, they still wouldn't believe it. True abyssal king. What was a true abyssal king? That was a terrifying existence that could cause the heavens to collapse and the earth to cave in, annihilating trillions of lives with a single thought. They were great characters that stood at the peak of the abyss, so how could they be controlled by others? Well, it was true that a true abyssal king could be controlled by others. As descendants of the Netherworld royal bloodline, their talent was good and they had some status in their race. They were qualified to know some secrets of the various abyssal races. But this absolutely wouldn't happen to a junior. Humph humph, just Qinyu's aura alone was inferior to theirs. The four Netherworld royal bloodline juniors glanced at each other and sighed with emotion. Reincarnation was indeed a skill. Their skills were good, but compared to Chinyu, they were far worse. Chapter 1160. The four descendants of a netherworld royal bloodline were envious and jealous of Yu's reincarnation technique. Of course, they weren't convinced, but their emotions didn't affect their actions. While the two men were still thinking of ways, the two princesses of the netherworld royal bloodline, who thought they were quite beautiful, took the initiative to attack. In fact, their thinking was very simple. Whether or not Yu's identity could make King Xuanzi swallow his anger. Just this point alone was worth investing in. If something really happened, they could leave a good impression on each other. Then, after they found out Yu's identity, they could advance or retreat and take the initiative. Of course, reality was very realistic, but this was also a survival instinct that the children of large families had to learn in the environment they grew up in. Cough, cough. Of course, taking a step back and looking at Yu's current appearance, it wouldn't be too much to say that he was handsome. If he was really willing to do something beneficial to both their bodies and minds, the two princesses of the netherworld would most likely not refuse. After all, the abyssal races were much more open to the matters between males and females compared to the vast Yang world. But reality was often crueler than one could imagine. The 18 skills that the two princesses had silently prepared didn't even have time to display before they were beaten black and blue. Yu didn't say anything and directly refused them, but his expression was very indifferent, and his eyes were even more indifferent. He was so indifferent that the two princesses suddenly felt like they were clowns on the stage. Shame filled their hearts, and they finally retreated. Of course, the princesses were full of fighting spirit. The more difficult it was to approach Yu, the more valuable he was to them. Once they successfully approached this kind of person who was difficult to approach, the relationship they established would be incomparably strong. But before the two princesses could come up with a new plan, they were stopped by King Xuanzi's gloomy face. Who was Yu? He and that old demon dragon Alpha had been schemed against, and the shadow of betrayal had also fallen into his hands. Although he didn't like Yu to the extreme, King Xuanzi had to admit that he was a character that couldn't be underestimated. Could such a person be won over by two little girls with a little honey trap? Haha, this was simply a joke. Yu could only laugh at the netherworld king bloodline in his heart. On the fourth day of the ship's journey, a vortex appeared in front of them. Yu's eyes brightened, but before he could think further, King Xuanzi appeared in front of him. This whirlpool is the royal bloodline's encampment. If you want to enter the depths of the frigid sea, you must make thorough preparations. Some crucial resources can only be found in the encampment of the royal bloodline. That was probably the explanation. Yu nodded to express his understanding. He had already explained the reason before. He could completely trust King Xuanzi. That old fellow wouldn't dare to harm him. The encampment of the royal bloodline? Yu's eyes flashed. The ship had already sailed into the vortex. A suction force came from within, pulling them into the pitch-black cold sea. After 3 more days, the temperature of the frigid sea became even more terrifying, especially after entering the whirlpool. An invisible force isolated the seawater outside, and the red lantern hanging at the bow of the ship became brighter and brighter. A steady stream of warmth was released from the hull of the ship, fighting against the terrifying cold. Even so, one could still clearly see traces of pale white coldness gradually staining the surface of the ship and spreading outwards. If this continued, it would be difficult for the ship to escape its fate of being sealed in ice. Luckily, this situation didn't continue for too long. The darkness in front of him suddenly vanished, and a warm and bright light emerged. All of the cold was like an illusion, vanishing without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Yu subconsciously narrowed his eyes, but he soon adapted. The light in front of him seemed to have been specially processed. Although it was bright, it wasn't blinding. Instead, there was warmth and gentleness everywhere. A floating island appeared in his line of sight. Around the island and below, there were white clouds like cotton candy. Soft and white, All of the light and warmth was released from it. Looking up, all one could see was darkness as deep as ink. It was repelled by the light. If one didn't personally come here, who would have thought that in the depths of the frigid sea, a place like a fairyland was hidden in a whirlpool? Several beams of light flew over from the island. After confirming his identity, they respectfully bowed. "We welcome King Schwanz's return." King Schwanza nodded without expression. He looked at Qin and said, "Qin is my guest. Receive him well and don't neglect him." After he finished speaking, he nodded to Qin. Then, he took a step forward and his figure instantly vanished from sight. The new Nightmare King had been born, but he still hadn't returned. Of course, he had to give the royal bloodline an explanation for this matter. Qin didn't know what King Schwanza would say, but it should be a perfect story. After all, such a long time had passed. It was more than enough for him to come up with an excuse to brush everyone off. As for whether or not the Netherworld royal bloodline believed him, that wasn't something Qin needed to worry about. The several members of the Netherworld royal bloodline that flew out of the island all had different expressions. They had clearly seen King Schwanza's actions just now. Did a true king need to specially greet someone? His appearance was ordinary and his aura was also ordinary. Then there was only one possibility. This person's background was amazing, and it wasn't just an ordinary kind of amazing. King Schwanza didn't think that his subconscious action had already given Qin background a highly credible endorsement. "Your Excellency Qin, welcome to Nether Island. Please come with us," a member of the royal bloodline said with a bright smile. The 4 members of the royal bloodline that had returned with the ship were immediately unhappy. What was the meaning of this? Did you want to throw us off and curry favor with Qin? Humph, humph, don't even think about it. "Your Excellency Qin, we will receive you well. There is no need to trouble you," a princess coldly said. Then, she turned around with a pleading look in her eyes. "Your Excellency, can you come with us?" In fact, it didn't matter to Qin who he went with. Then it would be these 4 people on the ship. It wasn't that Qin thought it would be easier to get along with them, but that these 4 people looked a bit stupid. It was unlikely that anything would happen to them. The 4 members of the royal bloodline were overjoyed, but if they knew that Qin had described them as stupid, they didn't know if they would still be able to smile. The Netherworld royal bloodline had secluded themselves from the world. The number of people that knew of their whereabouts in the dark abyss could be counted on one hand. For Qin to be brought back to Nether Island by King Schwanza without hesitation, this alone was enough to show how much he valued him. Moreover, the 4 members of the royal bloodline on the ship, after their successful competition, caused the people that came from the island to believe that Qin status was no trifling matter. "We cannot go against King Schwanza's will. Why must the 4 of you make things difficult for us?" "Humph. King Schwanza already told us to take good care of your Excellency Qin." Neither side gave way to the other, and neither side could convince the other. Seeing that Qin had no intention of interfering, they could only take a step back and act together. Thus, following this, Qin truly enjoyed the treatment of a Wang Mai Chao VIP. Everything was properly arranged. Mian had already woken up. As she followed behind Qin, her head was a little dizzy. But she also felt as if she had learned some incredible truth. Sir Qin really wasn't an ordinary person. Even the Netherworld King bloodline was fawning over him. Thigh, super invincible golden thigh. After doing this several times and confirming that he didn't need anything else, Qin reluctantly sent away the several enthusiastic members of the royal bloodline. He turned and sat down on a chair. He sighed and rubbed his temples. These fellows flattered him like a tide. Even if he wasn't tired, he was tired of listening to them. Before he could rub a few times, a cool and soft hand fell on his scalp from behind and began to rub. "Sir, if you're tired, then take a rest." It had to be said that her skill wasn't bad. Qin felt very comfortable as he subconsciously leaned back in his chair. He never thought that as he leaned back, he would first touch 2 soft and upright places. Qin coughed, not saying anything. Mianya blushed red. She moved back a little and then regretted it. It was rare for the young master to take the initiative, but she had actually moved back. What are you doing? Are you confused? If I went back up now, wouldn't it be too obvious? Would the young master not like it? After hesitating for a moment, Anya took a deep breath and prepared to move. But Yu opened his eyes and waved his hand. All right, I'll be quiet for a while. You go and rest. Anya's eyes revealed a trace of disappointment, but she didn't dare to object. She obediently nodded and returned to her room. Shwa! A sharp light flashed in Yu's eyes. The corners of his lips curved up in a smile. His eyes slowly swept around. Originally, he only had a 50 to 60% assurance that there was a channel deep in the cold sea. But now that he had experienced the Netherworld Royal Bloodline's retreat, he felt that he had at least an 80% chance of finding the channel back to the Vasyong world. This left Yu impatient. But no matter how anxious he was, he didn't lack time. King Xuanzi had clearly said that the depths of the cold sea were extremely terrifying, and he had to be fully prepared. Not to mention anything else, just based on this matter alone, Yu felt that King Xuanzi had no reason to deceive him. It was just that he didn't know how long this old fellow would need to arrange everything. Even if the people of the Netherworld Royal Bloodline couldn't see through his lies, they definitely wouldn't blindly believe everything he said. For such an important matter, he had spent a great deal of effort to arrange everything. But in the end, there was no harvest, so wrangling was inevitable. Reality proved that Yu wasn't wrong. For 3 days, he didn't see King Xuanzi again. Luckily, the Netherworld Royal Bloodline's care was still perfect and meticulous. It seemed that there weren't any major problems. This was good. As long as King Xuanzi could remain calm, it would only delay him for some time. No matter how anxious Yu was, it was only a few days. It wasn't anything at all. As his mood settled down, Yu began to continue his previous hobby, looking at the heavens, looking at the earth, looking at the air. The Netherworld Royal Bloodline's retreat island was certainly not ordinary. The more he looked at it, the more interesting it became. Yu gradually became obsessed and didn't feel that time was passing by. On the 10th day of entering Netherworld Island, a weary King Xuanzi finally appeared in front of him. As he looked at Yu's spirited appearance, he couldn't help but grit his teeth in hatred. In these 10 days, he had been completely overworked. Not only did he have to deal with all sorts of questions from his clan, but he also had to make arrangements. To explore the depths of the cold sea required a reason. The reason that King Xuanzi gave was to search for the missing true monarch of his clan. It was a grand and lofty reason that no one could refuse. But it also meant that this was a cover. It wasn't that King Xuanzi didn't want to find a more reasonable reason. It was because he simply didn't have any. As for Yu's identity and why he was brought back to Netherworld Island, King Xuanzi simply said that he was an old friend and sent them away. There really wasn't any more explanation. With his true monarch realm cultivation, he had the qualifications to bring people onto the island. Since you asked, I will give you an answer, but that is all. As for whether or not you were satisfied with my answer, sorry, that is not within my scope of consideration. Sensing the dissatisfaction in King Xuanzi's eyes, Yu smiled and poured a cup of hot tea for him. This tea is very good. Senior, please drink it before you speak. King Xuanzi coughed. Do you think the tea of my Netherworld Royal Bloodline is good or bad? He picked up the cup and drank it all in one gulp. He said, the arrangements have been made. We will leave in 2 days. He looked at Yu. Do we really have to enter the depths of the cold sea? Yu nodded. You can't tell me your goal? Yu nodded again. Xian Su King was so angry that he gritted his teeth even more. This bastard was playing a deep game here. Just you wait. Wait for me. Thinking about it, there was still 100 years. This aggressive thought had just popped up, but in the blink of an eye, it was smashed into pieces. He tossed out a demon crystal and left behind information about the Netherworld Royal Bloodline's exploration of the cold sea. Then, King Xuanzi calmly left. Yu probed it with his divine sense. Of course, it wasn't a complete record, but some of the information was still important. After he finished reading everything, he closed his eyes and thought for a moment. When he opened them again, they were much brighter. The depths of the cold sea. he hoped he wouldn't be disappointed. King Schwanz's words were worth believing. 2 days later, a carefully prepared ship left the Netherworld Royal Bloodlines Island. Yes, it was a large ship, even larger than Black Castle's. But on this ship, including Qin Yu and Myanya, there were only 7 people. Before King Schwanza, there were 4 members of the royal bloodline. These were the passengers of this ship. The space wasn't ordinary and bright. In comparison, King Schwanza's expression was solemn, and the faces of the 4 royal bloodline members were filled with excitement. They didn't know the true reason why King Schwanza wanted to explore the depths of the cold sea, but without a doubt this was an opportunity. There were dangers, and they weren't ordinary dangers. But with King Schwanza here, their safety was guaranteed. As long as they performed well and entered King Schwanza's eyes, their future would be bright. This was enough for them to take a gamble. Of course, there was another reason that made the 4 royal bloodline members feel at ease. A crucial reason. Qin Yu and Myanya were also on the ship. This was a simple truth. Qin Yu's aura wasn't anything special, and he might not be stronger than them. If he wasn't afraid, then they definitely didn't need to be afraid. Of course, Qin Yu's status was different, and he might have some hidden cards, but Myanya was just a beautiful maid. How could her life-saving methods compare to theirs? Since Myanya was brought along, that meant this trip was somewhat safe. If King Schwanza knew what these 4 juniors were thinking, he feared he wouldn't be able to help but curse them. What a bunch of idiots. How could they compare to Qin Yu? Even the little maid by his side couldn't compare to them. Don't be unconvinced. This is the truth. Believe it or not, even I might not be able to survive these 2. Qin Yu held Myanya's hand. His expression was calm, and his heart was even calmer. At this moment, he didn't have any other thoughts. He simply felt that this would give Myanya a greater chance of survival. Because she was left behind by Qin Yu, a chess piece to counter the Avatar. Although, strictly speaking, the Avatar would never betray the main body. Even the Shadow of the Abyss had betrayed him. What else was impossible in this world? In short, being cautious was the right choice. Hei Tiangang was Qin Yu's first chess piece in the light. Myanya was his second chess piece in the dark. The dark chess piece was, of course, more important. And the Avatar probably wouldn't have thought that Qin Yu would hand such an important matter to Myanya. He looked at the black, cold sea with a calm expression. This calmness contained the calmness of being able to face everything head-on. Qin Yu was truly prepared to accept any consequences. The large ship left the whirlpool and headed deeper into the cold sea. The big red lantern released its light, but it couldn't spread too far before it was swallowed up completely. In the darkness, the chill grew heavier and heavier. Chapter 1161. The ship that sailed out of Nether Island was called the Netherworld ship. Although this name wasn't very original, it didn't affect its powerful performance. Through the 4 members of the royal bloodline, Qin Yu was able to easily grasp the details of this ship. King Schwanza had indeed put in a great deal of effort to obtain the best ship that the Netherworld royal bloodline had ever built. Without a doubt, even though he was a true abyssal king, he still needed to pay a considerable price. After all, everyone knew that his excuse of entering the deep sea was nothing more than a pretense. On the 5th day, the Netherworld ship was very warm. The 4 members of the royal bloodline were filled with excitement. According to the ship's speed, it wasn't difficult to calculate the distance. Their current position was close to the limits of the royal bloodline's exploration of the cold sea, and there were no more than 20 people from the royal bloodline that had been here before. Just this point alone was enough to brag about their many years of experience. On the 10th day of sailing, the ship was still warm. It was just that the warmth had decreased a bit, giving off a feeling like a spring breeze. As the Netherworld ship broke through the pitch-black seawater and drew a long line, there were faint traces of frost on the part of the ship that came into contact with the seawater. The 4 members of the royal bloodline were responsible for maintaining the ship's course and checking its condition. This was their main job, so they naturally discovered this. Looking at the pitch-black sky and sea, they subconsciously frowned. As they looked at each other, They could see the worry in each other's hearts. On the 17th day of sailing, half of the hull of the Netherworld ship was covered in frost, and the temperature had clearly dropped. Moreover, what was most terrifying was that there was a chill in the air that couldn't be resisted. It constantly invaded one's body, and in order to ensure that they weren't affected, they could only constantly consume demonic energy to resolve it. On this day, besides King Schwanza, everyone on the ship was wearing a special cold-resistant clothing that was specially made for the Netherworld royal bloodline. The bright red clothing seemed very festive, like a burning flame. After wearing it, it felt warm, and the tense atmosphere on the ship immediately relaxed. On the 21st day of sailing, although it had only been 4 days, the chill of the cold sea had clearly risen by more than 1 level. This was because the entire surface of the Netherworld ship was covered in white frost. With the passage of time, this kind of cover was clearly becoming thicker and harder. The big red lantern at the bow of the ship was still lit, but the terrifying thing was that its light could only be maintained within the range of the ship. Once it radiated outside the ship, it would be swallowed up by the darkness. That's right, devouring was the right word to use. It was as if there were countless greedy mouths hidden in the darkness. They fed on light and fought to devour everything. It got colder. On the 26th day of the voyage, this distance had already far exceeded the recorded exploration process of the Netherworld royal bloodline. The large ship stopped in the sea because they had finally encountered the first cold sea creature that attempted to attack. The cold sea was in the depths of the abyss, so this creature was naturally a standard abyssal monster. The darkness outside the ship was a place where light could not enter. Thus, no one could see what this creature looked like. But that didn't stop them from clearly sensing how terrifying this cold sea creature was. Of course, it was terrifying. There was nothing much to say about it. A creature that could survive in a place like the frigid sea was absolutely not to be trifled with. Chinyu couldn't see through the darkness, but he could still see those giant eyes hidden beneath the icy cold seawater. Within that cold, cruel, and indifferent gaze, there was also a trace of fear. The object of this fear was, of course, King Schwanza, who was standing at the bow of the ship, frowning as he stared at the darkness outside. After a long period of silence, those eyes in the frigid sea vanished, and the Netherworld ship continued forward. Even though the danger had been averted, the atmosphere on the ship had become even more solemn. Perhaps it was because of the cold or fear. The 4 members of the royal bloodline, the 2 men and 2 women, had pale faces and sunk into deep silence. Chinyu could feel Mayanya's hand trembling. He looked at her and smiled. "Don't worry, there won't be any problems." At the bow of the ship, King Schwanza's ears pricked up. He frowned and almost couldn't help but jump up and curse out loud. "There won't be any problems, your ass." He had never encountered that sea creature before, and its aura was so strong that even he found it difficult to deal with. Scaring it away could only be considered good luck. Otherwise, who knew what the situation would be like now? Chinyu could feel King Schwanza's angry eyes. He lowered his head and didn't respond. This was because he knew that King Schwanza had a good reason to be angry. Moreover, Chinyu couldn't change anything because of this, because the Netherworld ship hadn't arrived at its final destination yet. On the 30th day of the voyage, the Netherworld ship had turned into a giant lump of ice. The layer of white ice gradually darkened, nearly fusing into one with the cold sea. The black ice represented the invasion of darkness. Thus, the range of the light from the lanterns at the bow was reduced by a great deal. It was still able to cover around half of the ship's hull, but the rest was hidden in the darkness. Even though it was at the same time, half of the ship was shrouded in light, and the other half was shrouded in darkness, as if they were isolated in 2 different worlds. No one thought about what would happen if they walked into the darkness and tried it. Even Chinyu suppressed his curiosity. This was because as King Schwanza looked into the darkness, even a blind man could clearly feel his heavy mood. The effect of the cold clothes was already negligible. After obtaining King Schwanza's approval, the 4 royal bloodline members took out red crystals. After pouring in demonic energy, they burned them. The red flames fell onto the red cold clothes, illuminating everyone's faces. But this couldn't hide the fear that gradually filled their eyes. On the 39th day of the voyage, on the netherworld ship that was still a lump of ice, the light from the lanterns could only cover the bow of the ship, around 100 feet in radius. The 4 royal bloodline members and Mion, you couldn't persist any longer. This was because all the methods used to resist the cold on the ship had lost their effectiveness. After receiving the pills that King Schwanza handed to them, the 4 royal bloodline members were well aware that after taking them, they would fall unconscious and fall into a state similar to suspended animation. Then, they would either wait for their recovery or fall into eternal sleep. Of course, they were afraid. The 2 princesses' eyes turned red, and their pale lips trembled several times. But in the end, they didn't say anything. But the pleading in their eyes was obvious. No one wanted to die, and they were no exception. It was just that they knew that in today's situation, their attitudes wouldn't change anything. The 4 royal bloodline members fell into a deep sleep. Chinyu looked at Mianya. "I won't let you die." Mianya's smile was forced. She believed in Chinyu's words, but sometimes a single person couldn't interfere with the progress of a matter. After she fell asleep, King Schwanza asked in a low voice, "Chinyu, do you want to continue?" Chinyu nodded. "Yes." On the 44th day of the voyage, King Schwanza made his move. This time, the deep-sea creature that blocked the netherworld ship was clearly stronger. It was so strong that even when facing a true abyssal king, it still dared to have thoughts of hunting. A great battle ensued. A battle between true abyssal kings was carried out in the pitch-black skies. All Chinyu could do was protect Mianya so that she wouldn't be affected. As for the 4 royal bloodline members, he could only say sorry and hope that their luck was good enough. King Schwanza returned wounded. The deep-sea creature that fought with him let out a pained and angry roar before its aura faded into the darkness. On the 45th day of the voyage, King Schwanza opened his eyes. As he moved, the layer of ice covering his body instantly shattered into powder. He turned and looked at the 4 royal bloodline members. In the end, some of them had bad luck. There was a man and a woman. Their chests were deeply sunken in, and their heads were filled with frozen blood. Their auras were completely gone. Chinyu paled. "I'm sorry." Before he finished speaking, he was interrupted. King Schwanza calmly said, "Life and death are decreed by fate. Your abilities are limited, so I won't blame you." He looked at Chinyu, his eyes faint. "Continue?" Chinyu was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. On the 46th day of the voyage, the lantern's light was forced to shrink to around 30 feet. The burning crystals on the deck had already been covered by a layer of ice. There wasn't the least bit of heat left. King Schwanza looked at the surrounding darkness, his eyes becoming increasingly indifferent. Chinyu held Mianya tightly. This woman's aura was like a candle in the middle of winter, about to be extinguished at any moment. On the 47th day of the voyage, the ship was attacked again. This time, the battle ended much faster than before. But it was clear that King Schwanza's condition was much worse. He should have used some sort of super strong hidden card to quickly repel the icy creatures. Sitting at the bow of the ship, within the 20-foot range of light, King Schwanza looked at Chinyu. He was silent. King Schwanza took a deep breath and slowly closed his eyes. But before he closed his eyes, his expression was even more indifferent than before. On the 48th day of the voyage, everything was quiet. It was truly quiet. The surrounding darkness was like a void. One couldn't even hear the sound of seawater being washed away. King Schwanza was still adjusting his breathing. Chinyu held Mianya, his eyes looking at the darkness outside. His pupils were unfocused, and it was unknown what he was thinking. On the 49th day of the voyage, with a sigh, King Schwanza opened his eyes. He looked at Chinyu beside him. It wasn't that the two of them were close enough to be this close. This was because the light of the lantern could only barely cover them. "Chinyu, I really don't want to come to this step, but I have no other choice." His voice was calm, and his eyes were even calmer. If indifference was a kind of emotion, then there was no emotion at all in his eyes right now. Chinyu turned his head. His neck made cracking sounds, and his frozen joints began to rotate like a rusty machine. After a brief pause, he asked, "Does Senior want to kill me?" King Schwanza said, "I don't want to, but I don't want to. Otherwise, all of us will be buried in the cold sea." As he spoke, the range of the lantern's light began to shrink. At this moment, the feeling it gave off was like a great mouth that was slowly closing. When a mouth closed, it was time to enjoy the delicious food and chew on it. King Schwanza didn't know what was hidden in the darkness, but he wasn't curious at all. If it was before, he thought that the missing true king of his clan might have been trapped somewhere. Now, this thought had been completely shattered. The depths of the cold sea, there was truly a great horror within. Even a true abyssal king would perish here. He said he would kill, but he didn't. In fact, this was the last chance he gave Chinyu. He was silent. It wasn't that he didn't want to leave, but that he couldn't. Otherwise, unless he abandoned the old turtle, it would be impossible for Chinyu to return to the vast Yang world. This was his first time entering the cold sea, and it would likely be his last. This was because Chinyu didn't believe he had the courage to rush in again. Don't look at how he was still alive right now. The pain he had to endure was something that no one could understand besides Chinyu himself. A knife cutting through flesh was a kind of excruciating pain. But right now, Chinyu was withstanding an onslaught of extreme cold that was at least 1,000 times more intense. This was a hellish experience. King Schwanza glanced at the darkness that nearly touched his robes. He lifted a hand and grabbed Chinyu's neck. As long as he spat out a bit of strength, his life aura would be completely erased. To do this, King Schwanza would certainly have to withstand the backlash of his oath. It would even cause irreparable damage to the true king realm. But between life and death, no matter how difficult the consequences were, they would become simple. Blue veins bulged out on the surface of his palm. At this time, Chinyu suddenly said, "Are you listening?" King Schwanza stopped, because at this moment, there really was a sound coming from the darkness. Although it was weak in the absolute silence, he could still clearly make out what it was. This was the sound of flowing seawater. Chinyu suddenly smiled. As he looked at the darkness that was so close, a brilliant light bloomed in his eyes. Ever since he had experienced the Netherworld Royal Bloodline's refuge, he had believed that he would definitely be able to find the channel to the vast Yang world. But now it seemed that he had really found it. King Schwanza's complexion changed. He could clearly feel the ship being pulled forwards, its speed starting to accelerate. Vortex, a massive vortex. It was so large that as it spun, it caused the seawater to roar and roar. The sound it emitted pierced through the terrifying darkness and spread into their ears. Instinctively, a thought appeared in King Schwanza's mind. The vortex they were about to arrive at was the center of the cold sea. What was inside? Could it be the same as the Netherworld Royal Bloodline? Could there be a hidden paradise-like place hidden within? But soon, a trace of fear rose up from the depths of his heart, causing King Schwanza to stiffen. At the same time, his impulse to investigate was instantly shattered. He could not enter a vortex. If he did, he would die, even if he was a true abyssal king. And what Chinyu was looking for was clearly this vortex. Did want to die? Chinyu smiled. He looked at King Schwanza and said, "Senior, there is no need to take the risk of killing me. Let go." When his fingers left his neck, he looked down at Mianya in his arms. "I will leave this woman to Senior's care. If possible, have her stay on Netherworld Island. I believe that with Senior's care, she will definitely be able to survive." King Schwanza took a deep breath. "You want to go in?" "Of course," Chinyu calmly said. "What I am looking for is this vortex." King Schwanza's lips moved, but he didn't make a sound. This was because he knew that even if he asked, he wouldn't get an answer. "Leave her to me." Chinyu smiled and nodded. He placed Mianya on the ground and took a deep breath. He struggled to stand up and face the darkness and suddenly smiled. "No, I don't have any strength left. I will have to ask Senior to help me." He lifted a hand and pointed towards the direction of the vortex. "It's there. Didn't Senior want to teach me a lesson a long time ago? This is the best chance. Let's do it." King Xuanzi didn't hesitate at all. He lifted his leg and kicked out. With a loud bang, the layer of ice covering Qin Yu's body shattered. He was like a stone as he submerged into the darkness. Puff! There was an extremely subtle sound. If one didn't listen carefully, they wouldn't have been able to detect it. King Xuanzi lifted a hand and pressed it down. He roared out loud, and the netherworld ship rumbled from within. With the eruption of a true king's full strength, it finally broke free from the suction of the vortex and began to slowly sail away. Looking back at the vortex, King Xuanzi was silent. He really did hate Qin Yu and wished that he could personally crush him to pieces. But he couldn't help but acknowledge that after confirming the existence of the vortex, the courage Qin Yu displayed was far greater than his own. Brat, this kick can be considered as this king's additional gift for your courage. Even though I really don't want to see you again, if it's possible, then live on. At least that way, this king will still have the chance to know what exactly is hidden in the whirlpool at the center of the cold sea. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.